Forum will now come to order. Without objection, the chair and the ranking minority member will have 5 minutes to make opening statements, followed by opening statements not to exceed 3 minutes by any other member who seeks recognition. Without objection, members and witnesses may have 5 legislative days to submit a written statement or extraneous materials for the record. Okay. Now, today, the subcommittee will hear from members of Congress and government and industry representatives about the United States government's various programs designed to promote the purchase of environmentally preferable IT products and the responsible recycling and disposal of IT equipment at the end of the product's life cycle. The U.S. government spends in excess of $70 billion annually on IT investments and disposes of more than 500,000 computers annually, or approximately 10,000 units each week. By default, it plays a pivotal role in shaping the IT marketplace. The subcommittee is particularly interested in learning about what government-wide policies and programs are now in place to promote the purchase of IT, energy-efficient products, the use of recycled and other environmentally friendly materials in the manufacture of the new IT products, and the responsible disposal and recycling of the end-of-life cycle IT assets. The subcommittee is also interested in learning to what extent mandated U.S. government green initiatives are being implemented by various agencies, as well as the level of interagency coordination and cooperation in the management and disposal of government IT assets. By way of example, Executive Order 13423, executed in the year 2007, requires that at least 95% of the agency's acquisition of IT and other electronic assets be registered, if available, with the Electronic Product Environmental Assessment Tool, known as EPEAT, which was developed with a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency in 2006 and is managed by the Green Electronics Council. EPEAT registered products, which include desktops, laptops, and printers, must meet requirements for energy conservation, materials, and life cycle management. Earlier this month, President Obama issued Executive Order 13514, which focuses on improving the federal government's environmental, energy, and economic performance, and also mandates agency procurement preferences for EPEAT. But according to press reports, only 13 federal agencies, including the GSA and EPA, comply with the EPEAT requirement in 2008, which accounts for roughly a quarter of IT procurement spending. While the government's recycling and disposal programs have strong attributes, I'm concerned that many of the programs are voluntary and not sufficiently integrated into the agency's core mission. The absence of a clear set of standards and policies is perhaps most evident with the ad hoc treatment of electronic waste, or e-waste, and the fact that national standards for the disposal of electronic products are lacking. One must question the efficacy of the government's green programs currently in place if we continue to fail to develop a national policy on the reclamation, recycling, and responsible disposal of IT assets. So I look forward to both an informative and informational discussion of an issue that undoubtedly will grow in importance as the responsible and effective functioning of government becomes increasingly dependent on and tied to the efficient management of its IT assets. So I thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee today and look forward to their testimony. Okay. I will now yield to our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Bilbray of California.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would apologize for my tardiness and impedance. I will just ask the unanimous consent that my written statement be included into the record, and I'd just like to thank the witnesses. Again, I apologize for my lack of promptness.
Okay. All right. If there are any members that would like to have opening statements, we will give you 3 minutes. And Mr. Collier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank you for holding this meeting, and I want to thank our colleagues, Representative Thompson and Representative Green. Very appropriate last name, Green programs. I will be leaving because I got to go chair a committee in Homeland, so I'll be leaving in a couple of minutes. But the only thing I do want to emphasize, Madam Chair and members, is that when you look at the emergent issues, one of them is the lack of standard uniform standards, which is the performance. What are the objectives? What are the goals? How do you indicate if you're meeting those goals or not? So I would like to emphasize that when we talk about emergent issues, that uniformity or lack of uniformity is something that we like to have. I would like to see the agencies where we can at least see what their objectives are, what their goals are, and how they're measuring those indicators. So that's the point that I want to just emphasize as one of the emergent issues that we're looking at.
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Quigley.
Just to thank you for having this meeting, we will be submitting a written document for our record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
There are no other opening statements. We'll now go to our first panel, and I will now introduce the first panel. I'd like to recognize Representative Mike Thompson, and he's represented California's 1st Congressional District since 1998. He's a member of the House Committee on Ways and Means and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman Thompson also formed the E-Waste Working Group to develop a national approach to adequately dispose of e-waste. And Congressman Gene Green has represented the 29th Congressional District of Texas since 1992. He serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Congressman Green is also co-sponsor of H.R. 2595 to restrict certain exports of electronic waste. And I ask that each of the witnesses now give a brief summary of their testimony and to keep this summary under 5 minutes in duration if possible. Your complete written statements will be included in the hearing record. And Congressman Thompson, would you please proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Bilbray and other members of the committee. I really appreciate the fact that you've taken this issue on and are holding this hearing. And Senator Watts, or Congressman Watson, your mention of current programs, many of them being voluntary and not having something that incorporates into our everyday practice of government, is absolutely on point and something we, I think, all need to be working towards fixing. My interest in this subject goes back from when I was to when I was first elected to Congress. As you mentioned, I started the group, but I've been involved in this for quite some time now. And as we all know, because of the technological advances in electronic equipment, things are getting better, they're getting smaller, there's more bells and whistles. These are great for consumers, but on the other end of it, we have products that have about a 2-year life expectancy, which means there's a heck of a lot of e-waste at the end of the day. In the 111th Congress, I've been working with my friend and colleague, Congressman Gene Green, on this legislation that you mentioned that would disallow the export of U.S. e-waste to any country that does not have high high environmental standards. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of it. We just sponsored a Capitol Hill e-waste collection day during the, I think it was the summer break, and we had over somewhere around 200 staffers who brought their e-waste into be appropriately recycled or reused. So there's a tremendous amount of it there, and it should not be going overseas in a way that's irresponsible, either environmentally irresponsible or morally irresponsible. And if you look at some of the recent TV investigatory pieces on what happens to e-waste, you know that they burn this stuff in open-air pits to get the plastic and the coating on the wire out of the mix so they can salvage the valuable components. They've got kids picking through this stuff, handling toxic materials to get these valuable components. And the areas where they're doing this, and most recently it was pointed out in Ghana, China, and Indonesia, some of the big offenders. And the population, the people that are working there have all kinds of very serious skin diseases, respiratory problems, throughout the entire community because of this open-air burning. This has got to stop, and I think our legislation is the first step towards putting an end to this immoral behavior. I'm on the Intelligence Committee and chair a subcommittee, and I'm very concerned about government computers getting into the wrong hands. And again, some of these TV reporting entities have found examples, and I have a picture of one of those that I'd like to submit to you, Madam Chair, for the record. And the last thing we need are unfriendly foreign countries getting information as to how we do our business, intelligence or otherwise, here in this country. And in the Intelligence Authorization Bill for 2010, I was able to get an amendment in that requires a threat assessment report on the security of e-waste disposal of federal property that's assigned to the U.S. intelligence community. And these items just have a great potential of getting into the wrong hands and causing us a great deal of problems. The EPA has estimated that the federal government discards some 10,000 computers every week. So we really need that national framework to better manage this. And in the absence of that, I believe that our federal government and our Congress needs to lead by example, not only help us get to that national framework, but while we're traveling to that point, we need to do it right here. In 2005, I had a concurrent resolution to get Congress and other legislative branch offices to work together to establish and implement a coordinated program for the reuse, recycling, and appropriate disposal of e-waste by offices of the legislative branch. I think that's an important effort, and I'm going to reintroduce that bill in the next couple of days, and I hope that I would be able to garner some support from this committee and others who may be watching your hearing and paying attention to your important work. So I thank you again for bringing this to a much greater national audience. This is something we really need to get ahead of and get control of, and I look forward to working with you in this committee to making sure that that happens. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your diligence and your concern and the work your subcommittee is doing. Appreciate it. Congressman Green, would you please proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member Bilbray, for holding the hearing on and looking, among other issues, the government's end-of-life electronic waste management. It's an honor to be here to testify on the bill that our staffs, myself and our staffs have spent countless hours, along with my colleague, Congressman Mike Thompson, on an issue we've been continuing to work to address. My real interest in the issue comes from working on and chairing a now defunct subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee. We started with an e-waste working group to put forward principles and try to develop legislation to stem the export of electronic waste to countries and facilities that are disposing of the waste in ways that are extremely harmful to the environment and to human health. Last summer, I became chair of that subcommittee and made it one of the top priorities to move the issue forward. Shortly after that, we introduced House Resolution 1395, expressing concern over the current federal policy that allows the exportation of toxic electronic waste to developing countries, and expressed the sense of the House and the United States should join other developed nations and ban the export of toxic electronic waste to developing nations. We also began working immediately on legislation that would ban the export of these products to developing countries that do not have the facilities to properly and safely handle this waste. What's produced is H.R. 2595, which amends the Solid Waste Disposal Act to do just that. While we're still working to strengthen language to ensure it cannot be manipulated, broadly it only allows export of products that be tracked through the refurbishment process back to the marketplace to prevent abuse. H.R. 2595 sets the framework for this, and we're now working with various stakeholders to ensure the language is strong enough and provides enough transparency to ensure that it cannot be circumvented. We're also trying to address the current problem where much of the e-waste collected in the United States and exported for allegedly recycling or reuse is actually exported to developing countries such as China, Ghana, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Thailand for unsafe salvage and metals recovery. There have been numerous reports and stories of toxic e-waste being burned in open fires with no safety equipment and often by children, and creating extremely toxic conditions. The fact that our electronic products are scrapped by children in developing countries using opening fires and acid baths is a disgrace. We wouldn't want to import other people's hazardous waste, so we shouldn't send ours overseas. These conditions have been documented in films, in the films Exporting Harm and Digital Dump, National Geographic Magazine, 60 Minutes, and even a CSI New York had a segment on it about a year ago, and many other media and government sources, including a GAO report released just over a year ago. I'm pleased Director Stevenson of the GAO Office of Natural Resources and Environment is on the next panel, and I'm sure he'll discuss the report in more depth. Briefly, the GAO report that was released in last September identified that Customs Border Protection already has a framework in place that could help EPA obtain data and improve oversight of exported used electronics. It's also stated the agency's automated tracking systems electronically store information from shippers' export declaration forms, which include tariff codes, and that adding more detailed codes to the schedule could assist other countries in controlling used electronics exported from the United States. Our legislation would attempt to build on this by directing the EPA to work with necessary agencies, including Customs and Border Protection, to set up a system to accomplish this while detailing what products can be exported and for what purpose. It's important to note there are currently no federal laws in place to prevent the export of this waste. H.R. 2595 includes strong protections that would make abuse of the export provisions illegal, costly, and unlikely, as well as providing complete transparency on where the exports are going. These protections demand that an export is only permitted if the competent authorities of the importing country certify annually in writing to the U.S. that such items intended for refurbishment are permitted by that country's laws and policy. If the competent authority of a country does not exist, then the export to that country by companies within the U.S. would be banned. Companies wishing to export must certify annually to the United States government the export of such items is intended for refurbishment. False certifications would result in criminal violations and penalties under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, also known as RCRA. Companies wishing to export must also further notify the EPA of the name and contact information of the exporter, the name of the contact information of the importer at the receiving facility, and the type of used electronic equipment or parts that will be shipped, and must also keep copies of normal business records, such as contracts demonstrating that each shipment of items was intended for refurbishment. The collection of such records would be critical to investigations of companies who are suspected of abusing provisions allowing for limited exports. Finally, items exported for the purpose of refurbishment must be packaged according to standards which the legislation directs the EPA to develop to prevent loss of functionality due to damage during transit. Such packaging requirements would constitute significant costs to the companies wishing to export such items. Madam Chair, I want to thank you again for holding the hearing and on the electronic life cycle and the role of our government's IT practice plays in it. It's an extremely important issue for our nation to address. And again, I want to thank Congressman Thompson for his leadership on the issue, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
I want to thank you, Congressman Green and Congressman Thompson, for taking your time to make statements. I'd like to call on Mr. Connolly if he has a statement to make.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson, and thank you for holding this hearing on green procurement practices for the federal government. This is an exciting time to be dealing with this topic as we have unprecedented technological expertise, interest, and environmental leadership at the executive level. By working together, I'm confident we can advance an aggressive agenda for the federal government to set the highest standard in stewardship in the area of procurement. I also want to thank our colleagues for their leadership, Congressman Thompson and Congressman Green. Very powerful testimony this morning. Congressman Kendrick Meek has also introduced legislation of which I'm a co-sponsor, H.R. 1766, which would open GSA supply schedules to local and state governments for purchases of green products. Since state and local governments have cumulative purchasing power in excess of $2 trillion, giving them access to GSA supply schedules would increase demand and drive down the prices federal agencies pay for these green products. Small businesses make up 80% of the participants in the GSA supply schedule, so giving local and state governments access to that schedule will also help those small businesses. I'm submitting testimony from Fairfax County staff, my district, Madam Chairwoman, for the record. As their written statement explains, this legislation would help localities across the country move forward with their green purchasing initiatives, and as an example of the kind of local and federal partnership we should seek to create. The National Association of Counties and National Government Purchasing Association have also endorsed H.R. 1766 because it would help counties like mine that wish to green their procurement practices, and I hope the subcommittee has an opportunity to mark up H.R. 1766 in the not-so-distant future. I applaud the representatives of the private sector who are here today as well, Madam Chairwoman, who are leading by example. In recent years, there's been extensive news coverage of electronic waste being shipped overseas and dismantled in highly dangerous conditions for workers, as we've heard from our colleagues this morning. I was pleased to learn about Dell's initiative to prevent export of electronic waste that would be processed in an unsafe, environmentally destructive manner. I'd hope that we can strive to achieve these objectives at a minimum. First, let's agree to mark up H.R. 1766, which would be a boon for local and state governments involved in green procurement. Second, to follow up on the testimony we've heard from our colleagues, Representative Green and Representative Thompson, we should identify the next steps to prevent the federal government from shipping e-waste overseas. If there is an administrative solution, then we should monitor its implementation. If it requires legislation, then we should develop and pass such legislation. Third, I would hope we could identify private sector best practices that could apply to the federal government. It sounds like we have a lot to learn. Finally, based on private sector testimony, it would be worthwhile to learn more about what could be a framework for broader re-waste legislation that would address production, recovery, and recycling of e-waste. Since companies like Dell already are doing much of this, we should try to find out what a reasonable baseline for e-waste recovery and recycling economy might be. Again, I want to thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for your leadership in holding this hearing, and thank our colleagues for their thoughtful testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. And before I go to our ranking member, Congressman Thompson, you said something about the computers and the e-waste. Is it possible that information could be pulled up out of our computer waste? Can you expand on that? When we get rid of a computer, is it still active? Can they still gain information from it?
Well, we have to be very careful as to how those are disposed of. And the federal government uses different processes for the disposal of the equipment. Oftentimes, computers are bundled and sold to salvage individuals, and they'll go through and maybe there'll be some working computers amongst that group, and they'll pull those out and reuse them. The others oftentimes are sent abroad, as we've both testified. And we just need to make very clear that there should be nothing We cannot allow anything to be left on these computers that can be obtained by folks who want to do us harm, and economically or from a national security perspective. And that's why we put the provision in the Intel bill to make sure this wasn't a huge problem. Some of the news shows, and Congressman Green listed the ones that have done reporting on this subject, have actually found U.S. surplus equipment overseas in these facilities that we talked about. And if any of those do have information, sensitive information, we want to make sure that that practice doesn't continue.
Mm-hmm. Congressman Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my concern is when we dispose of our own computers, because our personal information's on there, and obviously as a country we don't want someone having our intelligence information or our information. But as individuals, when we dispose of our computers, we want to make sure that our personal information is not on that, and it very well can be unless it's disposed of properly. And that's our concern, although our legislation only deals with the export of it, because that's such a huge industry, and we know from the publicity of both the news shows and other things how terrible it is in other parts of the world, that they're actually taking our waste and injuring themselves for it. And so that's what we want to control, and I appreciate you having a hearing today.
Thank you so much. I now call on our ranking member, Mr. Bilbray.
Madam Chair, just to echo what the gentleman were talking about, I think you'll remember there was a degree of concern when the then Vice President Gore thought that investigators could not pull up his email because he had erased them. But the fact is that it was embedded in the machine itself, and so that trail does run with the hardware. Congressman Thompson, your concern about your bill specifically keeping us from exporting into third world countries or countries with or areas with less environmental standards than we may think is appropriate. Now, does that address the issue of Californians sending our waste to Texas? I just got to say, frankly, though, as Californians,
I'm trying to work with this guy on this bill.
I almost want to tell my colleague that calling him Green was, in fact, a reminder that Mr. Green is an oil man, or it comes from one of the largest natural gas producers in the world. But I do worry about when we talk about this issue of where we're going, and I think one of the things that we've tried to do in this committee is look at the fact of not just waste, but how do we sort of preempt it by going to pre-engineered hardware that is designed to reuse the equipment so that there's elimination of the waste problem, but also the new material for future. My biggest concern is this, and I think there's two of us here who have actually managed a waste stream and been responsible for it for millions of people. As we talk about making sure it doesn't leave the country, Californians are probably one of the worst culprits of this, except for New York. New York is by far the worst. Let's send our waste to somebody else. Are we discussing at all at Energy and Commerce, my old haunts with you, Mr. Green, about the fact of what are we doing to require regions and areas to start siting the facilities? Because it seems always so easy to stop a recycling facility from being sited and stop people from being able to ship, but we don't find answers in the line. And have you guys even discussed the aspect of if we stop the export, and which we should, what are we doing proactively to site recycling facilities within the country?
Well, go ahead.
Let me just say that there are a number of recycling facilities, not only in our country, but in our state of California. I work with one in my district in Northern California. Every time I have an event for my campaign, I allow folks or make available to folks the opportunity to bring their old e-waste in, and I've got a company that comes and collects it. And they refurbish it or recycle it in a responsible way. We did the same when we worked with House admin.
So they're actually doing, wait a minute, what I'm saying though is they're actually breaking out the components and reselling the material.
Correct, here in this particular company in California. But we did the same when we did the staff pickup day on the Hill this year. We worked closely with House admin to really vet the company that we were using. We didn't want to, bring somebody in to collect all this e-waste and find out they're sending it to one of these countries that does it incorrectly. So the answer is yes. We do have these facilities here. There are companies that do it and do it right. We need to take some responsibility to make sure that we do the legwork necessary, run all the traps to make sure they are the appropriate company. And then lastly, you mentioned the front-end engineering to make sure that these computers and electronic devices were more acceptable to recycling and reuse. And there is a lot of effort underway, and a lot of that's being done in the Science Committee by our colleague Bart Gordon, who's taken a real keen interest in this and has been working, I know, with Gina and I to not only on our issue, but...
I know as a member of that committee, I'm working with Bart with that. And we're trying to get the engineers basically to design the equipment up front to use to have recyclable products on here.
Very important.
And I think both you gentlemen will agree that one of the biggest problems we've had historically with the term recycling, it means separation and collection, but 99% of the material gets shipped to the Far East, to a third world country. We don't recycle in this country hardly at all. We separate, we collect, and then we send it off to somebody else to do it. And I'm glad to hear you talking about we're actually being proactive about that. And our state's been the worst about trying to be an ally at citing these industries and these businesses within our own jurisdiction and having the environmental regulations compatible to that kind of environmental strategy, one of our greatest frustrations. Mr. Green,
Our country does have experience with the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, which prohibits exportation of toxic materials. And the best example I know is that in Northern California and in Texas and Virginia, there's these old mothballed fleet ships that at one time they thought they could export them to other countries that don't have our standards, but you can't. And so in Northern California, they're actually having to clean those ships before they can ship to Brownsville, Texas, or there's other yards on the East Coast that will do it, because they can't export those to China, although, it's a worldwide disaster what's happening with ships that are just run up on the banks in China, India, Bangladesh, and they build communities around taking apart that ship, and they have astronomically bigger problems than what we're dealing with. But we can do the same thing with electronic waste. I'd love to have those pre-engineering so those parts could be recycled. The problem we have today is that a lot of groups, including cities who do recycling, they assume that it's going to be recycled safely, but they're really putting it in a container and it's shipped to China. Our legislation would prohibit that. I want us to develop the industry to deal with that ourselves. And we can do it in our country. We do it on lots of other things, and we can do it for electronic waste. Because, again, that's a job base. My name's Green, but I'm more closer, when we have the Green-Blue Coalition, I'm more closer to the blue collar than I am to the green collar side. But in this way, it can be a win for both, because we can have an industry that will recycle this and create jobs in our own country instead of devastating parts of the world.
yeah, it is too bad that in a state that was one of the largest marine industries in the world, we now have to ship our ships to Texas to be recycled because the infrastructure is so...
Congressman Solomon Ortiz, who represents Brownsville, is very happy that you're having to do
Okay.
that.
Thank you very much. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Quigley? Yep. Okay. Mr. Meyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, I'm kind of interested to hear, whenever we dispose of computers that have sensitive information on it, is there a protocol that we have for doing that to make sure that, we mentioned a minute ago that some of this information is still on the hard drives. Is there not a protocol to keep that from happening?
There are protocols, and I think the second panel, I believe there's witnesses that can speak specifically to that. It falls within their jurisdiction as to how that's to take place.
Okay, just another quick question with regards to disposal of these e-products here. Do we have anything in the contract when we purchase it from the supplier for them to buy back or to dispose of it themselves? Is there any incentive to do that, or we buy it from the supplier and then we're going to do the disposal ourselves? I mean, it looks like you could probably put something in there as a buyback provision that would incent them to do something like we were just talking about, to develop recyclable type of materials, so that if they knew they were going to have to buy it back, they would be able to do this at a profitable scenario.
I'm not certain as to all of the different government contracts and what they include or don't include, but I do know that there are certain computer companies that have provisions whereby you can return the old computer to that company. It's a good thing. But at the same time, that's been one of the stumbling blocks trying to figure out how we get our arms around the whole issue of recycling e-waste. You know, part of the problem that we have right now is that you've got 50 different states all trying to deal with what the state process and the state laws are going to be regarding this issue. And we're trying to figure out maybe not all of it, but one of my issues is trying to figure out how to make that happen across the entire country. And one of the stumbling blocks have been when you get all the stakeholders together, everybody agrees that it's a problem, we need to do something about it, but like so many other things, it becomes, the details become difficult. And some of those, there's some of the manufacturers who say, wait, you know, our hands are clean on this. We have a program internally where we bring this stuff back into our jurisdiction and do it. So the answer is yes, some of them are, some of them aren't. And what the government, specific government contracts are probably differ between, you know, different parts of the government.
It would seem to me that if you had a requirement in the contract, that they would certainly either develop their own way of recycling or contract with somebody to do that, and it would solve some of our problems. I'll leave it back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I want to thank Congressman Thompson and Congressman Green for your testimony this morning and your concern, and we will be having you in again. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'd like now to ask for the second panel to come up and take your seats.
We have to take all their MTDB for 10 years. I guess they can take all our... We ship so much to Texas.
Yeah.
No, they're going to the session. There's no votes until 12.
Go ahead, Bud.
Yeah, you're gonna go here. Here, right here.
It is the committee's policy that all witnesses are sworn in, so I'd like the witnesses to now stand as I administer the oath. Raise your right hands, and do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, thank you. Let the record show that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative, and you're now seated. I'd first like to introduce Mr. James Jones. He's the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Prevention, Pesticides, and Toxic Substances. He is responsible for managing the daily operations of the office, which oversees the nation's pesticide, toxic chemical, and pollution prevention laws. The office has had an annual budget of more than $250 million and employs over 1,200 staff. In his 20-plus years with the EPA, Mr. Jones has also served as Director of the Office of Pesticide Programs, where he was responsible for the regulation of pesticides, in the United States with a budget of $150 million and 850 employees, making it the largest EPA headquarters program office. Mr. John Stevenson is the Director of the Natural Resources and Environment for the Government Accountability Office. He's directed numerous studies and research projects, directed numerous studies and research programs, issued hundreds of reports, and he has testified many times before both the House and the Senate committees. Mr. Stevenson's area of expertise regarding environmental protection includes clean air and water, chemical controls, toxic substances, climate change, Superfund, and hazardous materials, spill prevention and cleanup. He has also conducted GAO studies and investigations related to information technology, federal acquisition, and federal grant areas. Mr. Stevenson has also worked as Deputy Staff Director for the Senate Special Committee on the year 2000 Technology Program. And Ms. Casey Coleman has served as Chief Information Officer for the U.S. General Services Administration since 2007. As Chief Information Officer, Ms. Coleman manages the agency's $500 million information technology program, and she oversees the management, acquisition, and integration of GSA's information resources. Her oversight includes strategic planning, policy, capital planning, systems development, information security, enterprise architecture, and e-government. Prior to this position, Ms. Coleman served as the Chief Information Officer for the Federal Acquisition Service in 2006. Her other experiences include GSA's Office of Citizen Services, where she launched the USA Services government-wide Citizens Customer Service Program. And so as we get started, I'd like to call on Mr. Jones.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss EPA's role in the procurement and management of green initiatives related to IT assets. I'm glad to be here with colleagues from GAO and GSA, as well as representatives from the NGO community.
Excuse me, Madam Chairman, could I ask Mr. Jones to move the microphone closer? It's hard to hear.
Sure, I'm sorry. How's that? Over the last several years, the Environmental Protection Agency has been working very hard to green IT procurement and to reduce our environmental footprint at EPA and across the federal government. Today, I will discuss several programs that EPA and the federal government uses to guide the management of our IT assets along their complete life cycle, from product manufacturing to purchasing to use and ultimately to proper disposal. Let me take a few minutes to briefly describe these programs. The first one is Energy Star. Energy Star is a joint program of EPA and the U.S. Department of Energy. Since 1992, Energy Star has helped to revolutionize the marketplace for cost-effective, energy-efficient products. The program is a trusted source of unbiased information that helps homeowners, businesses, and other consumers understand their opportunities for energy savings with a simple and widely recognized logo. The next one is EPEAT. EPEAT is a green purchasing system for electronics. It is managed by the Green Electronics Council, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. EPA was an early funder of this effort and continues to provide technical support for the development of EPEAT green standards for new product types. EPEAT evaluates and then registers products based on a total of 23 mandatory criteria to target many different environmental endpoints, from energy reuse to reduction or elimination of toxic metals and chemicals, and even product packaging. One of these criterion is that EPEAT products must meet Energy Star requirements for energy efficiency. This program helps people and institutions identify and buy environmentally preferable electronics, and helps manufacturers gain market advantage by building greener electronic products. The EPEAT program has had tremendous and enthusiastic response. There are almost 3,000 EPEAT registered products from 32 manufacturers. In 2008, according to the Green Electronics Council, there were purchases of 44 million EPEAT products in the United States. Given the enthusiastic participation so far, EPA is actively exploring opportunities with many EPEAT partners to expand the program beyond its current slate of computer products. Standards are being created for copiers and fax machines and televisions, and plans are in place to develop standards for servers and cell phones. Given that the federal government is likely the largest purchaser of consumer products in the U.S. and spends an estimated $74 billion a year on information technology, we know that this is an enormous opportunity for us to green our own house. So we work hard to lead by example on ways to purchase greener electronic products, reduce their impacts during product use, and manage obsolete electronics in an environmentally safe way. To do that, EPA, working collaboratively with the Federal Environmental Executive, invited our federal partners to participate in the Federal Electronics Challenge, which laid out the following goals by the end of 2010. 95% of computer purchases are EP registered, and 100% are Energy Star enabled. Electronic equipment achieves an average lifespan of at least 4 years, and 100% of non-reusable electronic equipment is recycled using environmentally sound management. 16 federal agencies and more than 220 federal facilities are participating in the Federal Electronics Challenge and are on track to meet virtually all of the 2010 goals. In 2008, FEC partners reported 88% of computers and monitors purchased in 2008 were EP registered. The average life of computer equipment in 2008 was 45 months, just short of the goal of 48 months for 2010. Finally, we also need to manage electronics effectively when they have outlived their useful lifetime. Specifically, the federal government manages the disposition of about 10,000 computers a week, not to mention other forms of electronics. In order to assist federal agencies in recycling as much of these materials as possible and safely disposing of the remainder, EPA manages READ, the Recycling Electronics and Asset Disposition Program. This program provides federal agencies with a dependable method of properly managing electronic inventories, recycling electronic equipment, and disposing of excess or obsolete electronic equipment in an environmentally responsible manner. EPA has awarded contracts to companies that can evaluate each piece of unwanted equipment and its components and then reuse, recycle, or dispose of them under the following hierarchy. Refurbish and resell them using the proceeds to offset costs, donate them to charitable causes, recycle as much as possible, and properly dispose of the remainder. This program is now self-sustaining, meaning that sales from recycling pays for the program. These program descriptions and results just scratch the surface of what is taking place in the world of greening IT in the federal government, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Congressman Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today to discuss our work on federal procurement of computers and other electronic products and ways in which procurement of such products can reduce the impact of electronic waste, or e-waste. The federal government is the world's largest purchaser of electronic equipment, annually spending nearly $75 billion on products and services, or 7% of the world market. Through its purchasing decisions, the federal government has substantial leverage to enhance recycling infrastructures and stimulate markets for environmentally preferable electronic products. E-waste disposal has become increasingly important because of rapidly advancing technology, which has led to increasing sales of new electronic products, in particular computers, monitors, PDAs, and cell phones. With this increase comes the dilemma of what to do with the old computers and electronics. If discarded improperly, a number of adverse environmental impacts may result, ranging from the loss of valuable resources in the electronics, such as copper, gold, and aluminum, to the potential harmful substances such as cadmium, lead, and mercury entering the environment. EPA estimates that the federal government disposes of 10,000 computers a week, as you've heard. Agencies generally can donate their reusable equipment to schools or other nonprofit educational institutions, give them to a recycler, exchange them with other federal, state, or local agencies, trade them in to offset the cost of new products, or sell them through GSA's surplus property programs, which then sells equipment at public auctions. Federal agencies, however, are not required to track the ultimate destination of their e-waste. Consequently, they don't know what happens to it. In our August 2008 report, we showed that some U.S. electronics recyclers, including ones that publicly tout their exemplary environmental practices, showed a willingness to violate U.S. hazardous waste export laws and export e-waste to countries in Southeast Asia, where they were often dismantled under dangerous health conditions using methods like open-air incineration and acid baths to extract precious materials, as you heard from the two congressmen. In November 2005, we reported on 2 promising initiatives that could help federal agencies and others in procuring, operating, and disposing of electronic products in ways that would save costs and reduce such e-waste impacts. And you just heard the EPA witness explain those. First, EPA's EP program assists procurement officials in comparing and selecting computers with environmentally preferable attributes like energy efficiency features, snap-in components for ease of upgrade, and reduced toxicity of materials. Second, the Federal Electronic Challenge, or FEC program, helps agencies fully utilize the benefits of EPEAT-rated electronics by providing resources to help extend product life, operate them in an energy-efficient way, and expand markets for recycling and recovered materials. Notably, energy savings and environmental benefits to the federal government have resulted from these initiatives. EPA reports that 16 agencies and 228 federal facilities representing about 1/3 of the federal employees participated to some extent in these programs, and that for these participating agencies, 88% of all computers and monitors were EPEAT-registered products. In addition, 50% of the electronics taken out of service were donated for reuse, 40% were recycled, about 8% were sold, and 2% were disposed of. These environmentally preferable choices enabled over $40 million in savings at the end of 2008. The problem is that not nearly enough federal agencies and facilities are taking advantage of these electronic product stewardship programs. First, if 1/3 of the federal agencies are participating in these promising initiatives, it means that 2/3 are not, despite instructions to do so in executive orders signed by both Presidents Bush and Obama. Second, few participating agencies are maximizing the use of these initiatives. For some, participation merely means that the agency has identified its current practices for managing electronic products and set goals to improve them, but only 2 federal facilities by the end of 2008 showed that they actually managed electronic products through all 3 life cycle phases: procurement, use, and disposal. For perspective, we calculated that if federal agencies in the normal course of procurement replaced 500,000 computers and monitors with EPEAT-registered products and operated and disposed of them in accordance with FEC goals, they could save over $200 million in energy usage and realize other cost, waste, and emissions reductions. This is the equivalent of annual energy use for over 180,000 homes. As the world's biggest user of electronic products, the federal government simply must take more of a leadership role in this area. Madam Chair, that concludes my summary, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Ms. Coleman.
Good morning, Chairwoman Watson, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to appear before you to discuss the application of green policies in the lifecycle management of GSA's information technology assets. GSA has taken a lifecycle approach to our IT sustainability program. We buy energy-efficient devices certified through the Electronic Product Environmental Assessment Tool, EPEAT, which you've just heard about, a program developed with a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency. We encourage our users to rely on fewer devices, such as shared multifunction printers rather than a printer on every desk. We employ modern approaches, such as virtualization, to reduce the number of servers required to perform the same amount of work. And we have a program to ensure that assets at their end of life are recycled responsibly. GSA's path toward a sustainable green IT program began maturing in 2007. That year, GSA began a program to consolidate all agency infrastructure and operations into one program called GSA IT Global Operations, or GetGo for short. We consolidated 39 contracts and 15 help desks into a single program under the management of the GSA CIO. The GetGo program was critical to enabling our green IT efforts. Previously, our IT assets were not standardized, and there was no central accountability or visibility into where we had assets deployed. Through GetGo, the Office of the Chief Information Officer began to modernize, standardize, and consolidate the agency's infrastructure. Our goals were cost savings, improved sustainability, and equipping our workforce with modern tools and effective support procedures necessary for them to perform their missions effectively. Our infrastructure management efforts have yielded significant green benefits in several areas, including server and printer consolidation, telework support, and toner management. On the broader scale, we are investigating new technologies such as cloud computing and green data center advances, which offer the promise of further significant reductions in energy consumption. Madam Chair, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss this important subject. GSA is committed to environmentally friendly policies and procedures throughout the IT lifecycle. We will continue our current initiatives and are constantly on the lookout for new and innovative ways to become even more green. This concludes my testimony. I will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Witnesses, and I'd like to first start with Mr. Stevenson. The federal agencies probably are responsible for more e-waste than any others. And is data on e-waste maintained for the federal government as a whole, or is it maintained by individual agencies? Can you kind of clarify that for us?
GSA might be a better person to answer that, but I think they maintain their inventories themselves. However, participation in the kinds of environmental programs we're talking about
well, let me see.
are maintained by EPA.
I'm not aware whether the government's collecting the information across the entire government or whether it's by individual agencies. We'd have to get back to you on that.
Mr. Stevenson, what would you suggest in order to have this analysis, data analysis?
Well, we're looking at the environmental stewardship programs, and we're pleased with the progress in the first 4 years of the program, but we just think there's a great opportunity to increase participation in the program, make sure that the EPEAT standards are rigidly adhered to. Both Presidents Bush and Obama expressed their desire for them to do so. In the executive order that was just established 3 weeks ago, there's even a requirement for OMB and the Council of Environmental Quality to monitor agency participation in those programs. So we think, I showed you I described the cost savings that could occur if we did that, let alone the implications of end-of-life disposal that you heard Congressman Green talk about.
Thank you. Of the e-waste generated by our federal government agencies, how much is sent for reuse and how much is recycled? Any one of the three of you?
Our statistics show that about 40% are recycled. Only about 2% are disposed of. The problem is recycled means giving to a recycling contractor. Mm-hmm. And without downstream auditing, you're not sure what that recycling contractor is doing with it. The federal government doesn't do its own recycling. It contracts with others to do that to assure that the recycler is credible. That's what we mean by downstream auditing, making sure they're good actors. And we found in our analysis in 2008 that there are many bad actors out there that promise environmental stewardship but don't deliver. They're the very ones that wind up exporting this equipment overseas.
And again, Mr. Stevenson, we understand that agencies' compliance with EPEAT and other electronic stewardship requirements is reported to the OMB and via environmental scorecards. And according to press reports, 13 agencies, including the GSA and EPA, complied with EPEAT requirements in 2008. But they accounted for only 1/4 of the IT procurement spending. How much has compliance with EPEAT improved since then?
That's a better question for
okay,
EPA,
Mr. Jones.
I think.
And you can jump in, any one of the three of you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We expect that those numbers will be improving pretty dramatically in the coming years. One of the issues that we are dealing with in the executive branch as it relates to procurement is that IT contracts, as many contracts, are often on 5-year or 10-year cycles. So an agency that's got a large IT procurement contract that expires, let's say, in 2013 will not be purchasing any IT until 2013. So when that contract comes up, through the executive order and a recent acquisition regulation that was promulgated in January of 2009 will be able to ensure that those acquisitions will be fully compliant with the EP requirements that have been established in the federal government. So we think that over the next 5 years in particular, for some agencies a little bit longer than that if they have very long IT procurement contracts, we'll be getting more, those numbers will be climbing up pretty dramatically to ultimately reaching the goal of 95% of all IT procurement being EP compliant.
Ms. Coleman, determining how much e-waste is generated is difficult, we understand, and often attention is paid only to the end-of-life management of cathode ray tubes, or CRTs, and almost nothing is known about other categories of e-waste, and such as keyboards, mice, flat panel monitors, central processing units, cell phones, which also contain hazardous constituents are recyclable materials, and it may be difficult to determine what happens to e-waste after it is collected by a recycler. Recycling may include various activities such as sorting the waste, demanufacturing it to remove hazardous constituents, and the export of certain components for further processing. It may also simply involve the export of whole units for refurbishment and reuse, or for processing for recycling. Recycling that involves entirely domestic operations will likely be more costly than those that simply export e-waste. And it is possible that the practices of any downstream vendors will be unknown. And so the policies of individual agencies may be relatively easy to find, but documentation that demonstrates compliance with these policies may not be easy to determine, particularly at the field level. So, Ms. Coleman, given GSA's high volume of purchases of IT and other equipment, please respond to these questions. Describe the steps that GSA takes on the instructions of GSA to provide to other federal agencies to ensure that donated, recycled, or publicly sold federal electronics equipment is not irresponsibly exported to developing countries where it may threaten human health and environment.
Madam Chair, I can speak to the steps that GSA follows internally. I'll have to get back to you with the information about GSA's information that would be shared externally with our customer agencies. Within the agency, we have a four-step process for our disposal of end-of-life IT assets. The first step is to put end-of-life IT units, monitors, computers, and so forth, printers, up for charitable donations through the Computers for Learning program. The second step is to make them available to other agencies that may have a use for them. The third step is to put them up for public auction through GSA's online auction site. The vast majority of our devices are handled through these first three channels. Those that remain are returned to the reseller as a credit for new devices, and the terms of the contract call for responsible recycling on their part.
Mr. Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Jones, there's reported 21 million metric tons of waste produced in North America. You know what portion of that is United States? What's our national production of e-waste every year?
I don't know that, Mr. Bilbrey. I would need to get back to you on that question.
Okay. But let's just say a lion's share of that 21 million metric tons would be United States, wouldn't you assume, between Canada and Mexico and the United States?
Yes, I would.
What is our capability to recycle within those borders?
That's another question I don't think I have the answer to, but would need to get back to our capacity.
You know, I just think that we've got a panel before us, just before you, that says we're going to outlaw the exporting to a large percentage, but we're not talking about what are we doing to preempt that export by citing. What does the EPA do to assure that we have recycling facilities within the United States to address this problem? What do you do today?
Well, as you probably know, Mr. Congressman, that the recycling in the United States does not have a federal mandate related to it. There is no federal requirement related to recycling. We have worked with the private sector interested parties in developing certification programs. These are voluntary consensus standards so that if a recycler claims to follow certain practices, there is some third-party verification of that. So it's largely been, from the federal government, a voluntary approach where we encourage recycling and then we work with interested third parties in establishing verification standards to ensure that recycling is followed according to good environmental practices.
What was the, does the EPA know how many facilities have been cited in the last decade? And what is their volume capabilities that we have done? Basically, if it's automobile production, if it's the production of the units within the United States, you know, Department of Commerce can tell us what was produced within our jurisdiction. Can EPA tell us what was recycled within our jurisdiction?
The agency could provide the data by a range of sectors, from newspaper to glass recycling to I think that we actually probably could give you a fair amount of data on electronics recycling.
Okay, now when we get in here, when we talk about the recycling, we're not talking about source separation. We're talking about a product, the waste stream being made into a marketable product within the United States.
So the recycling leading to some meaningful economic reuse.
Within the jurisdiction of the United States.
I do not have access to that information with me, but I expect that the agency's got a fair amount of specificity with respect to, by sector, that kind of data.
Okay, I'll just tell you something. As somebody that's worked on environmental issues since 1970, it really pains me to watch the ships on the West Coast drop off automobiles and get filled with cardboard, you know, plastics and steels and whatever, and the ships go off to over the seas with our waste products, and we do very little of that proportionally in this country. My biggest concern is that rather than reactionary and regulatory, we need to take with our environmental strategies the kind of approach that the Eisenhower Act did with transportation. We don't just wait for the private sector to come forward with a proposal for a highway. We don't wait for them to cite it, to do the environmental regulations, whatever, and then we just oversight it. We are proactive partners from the get-go to be able to create the interstate system that all of us, you know, brag about. That wasn't just a result of the private sector doing all the heavy lifting and the federal government being a passive observer and a regulator. We're actually proactive in that. I just would really like to see you be able to come back to this committee with, we have a strategy of making sure that we look for good locations, we look for good companies, we actually work with them, we help them cite it. When a local community is opposing it based on this, we're proactive at working with them as partners, just like we do with the freeway. I mean, let's face it, the federal transportation works with the local, the state to cite and to move forward with that. We haven't done that with our recycling facilities. We've been a passive, sort of hands-off approach. And I think with that is we're going to run into this crisis. We keep saying no, 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 and that's our government's obligation. It's easy to say no. But it's almost like me asking my son to take out the trash, but feel like I don't have the responsibility to make sure there's a trash can for him to put it in. That's your problem, son. My job is just to mandate that you have to get rid of this stuff. I hope that as we're talking about, Madam Chair, outlawing the exporting of this material, that we bear the responsibility with the right to restrict exporting, comes the responsibility of being partners at citing the facilities to be able to recycle it. And Mr. Jones, I apologize, but give you a chance to respond to that.
I appreciate that, Congressman Bilbray. I will say that to date, the executive branch, the EPA in particular, our energy has been around the design of products to try to work to design these products so that they do not create wastes that are difficult to manage, and I think you'll hear somewhat from our colleagues with the Green Electronics Challenge, or I'm sorry, the Green Electronics Council about their efforts around EP to design electronics so that they do not create wastes that become difficult or potentially environmentally challenging to recycle. So far our energies are around design as opposed to the actual recycling aspects of where they, ultimately the disposition of these products.
And the problem is the people feel like they got a right to be able to regulate their own states, but they feel no responsibility to accommodate the waste stream. And California is one of the worst. I mean, our low-level radiation issue, our lack of siting medical waste facilities is a blatant example of just irresponsible environmental management. So I bear that, and the chairwoman, both of us come from a state that has not set a good example on that and is trying to reform ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Ms. Coleman. In your testimony, I was interested, you have highlighted the telework program that you work with, and I was kind of interested to see, in order to set this up, one of the things we're talking about here is conservation and getting rid of all of our excess e-products here. And to set this up, how much extra e-product do we have to purchase or use to be able to set up the ability of people to telework from home or from some sort of central location? Is that, it would seem to me like a computer at home, computer at work is still a computer. But am I missing something here, or is it basically about a trade-off there?
You point to a good issue, sir, that we addressed in 2007 with GSA's Telework Challenge is the name of the program. Mm-hmm. At that time, GSA had fewer than 20% of its employees teleworking, and we undertook a initiative to see that over 50% of our employees were regularly teleworking in order to reap the benefits such as reduced dependence on foreign oil, reduced congestion, improved employee morale, and improved ability to respond in the event of a continuity of operations or a building emergency situation. As I said in my opening remarks, we have instituted a policy that encourages the reliance on fewer devices. In order to do that and avoid the situation that you refer to where employees might have a computer at home, a computer at work, and perhaps another one in their car for emergencies, we outfitted all eligible employees for telework with laptop computers, which we ask that they use either when they're teleworking at home or in the office in a docking station.
Have you seen the program? Has it increased productivity of individuals, or have you seen a drop-off, or has it been wildly successful, or how do you analyze it, I guess?
We believe the program has been and continues to be successful. Our goal in 2007 was 20% of our employees teleworking, and in 2008, 40%, and then at the end of 2009, we were at 46% of our employees regularly teleworking, of our eligible employees regularly teleworking. And it's viewed as both a benefit on the part of employees and a helpful aid in the part of management, because now we have employees who can work on situations where they might otherwise not be able to in the event of a snow emergency or whatever.
Well, that increased participation, but did it increase productivity?
Yes, sir.
It did. Okay. Do you have any incentives for people to do this?
We do not offer any particular incentives in terms of paying for broadband access. We do provide them with modern equipment. In some cases, they have not only a laptop but also a voice-over IP phone, which allows them to function as if they were in the office with the same phone number and same access to our employee directories. So there is sort of an inherent benefit in telework through foregoing a daily commute that is viewed as part of the benefit of participating in telework.
How widespread is your program? Is it just in your agency, or are you promoting this throughout state, federal government, or how are you administering this, or where are you going with it?
GSA and the Office of Personnel Management jointly have a responsibility for the government-wide oversight of the federal executive branch telework program. GSA, because it has that role, viewed itself as obligated to be a leader in that effort, and that's the program I refer to is telework within our agency.
What do you anticipate being the ultimate goal to max out your program? I see 50% is your target here, and you've reached that or very close to it already. Is that the optimum of where we need to go with this?
We haven't established a higher goal. However, we are looking at the program to see if perhaps now that we have a regular practice of telework and a culture of telework, perhaps there's opportunity to do more. At this time, we haven't reestablished new goals.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, the organization called Recycling Assets and Electronics and Assets Disposition Services are referred to as READ.
Yes.
How long do these contracts run?
Madam Chair, the existing contract actually expires at the end of this year, but I will say that we have been competitively put out of business in that there are alternative government entities who are stepping up to the plate who will be able to provide that contract for cheaper than we were able to. And so when this contract expires, that will be the agency's last contract.
I see. Because the questions that we're concerned about, that we've been raising, what e-waste is sent for recycling and how is it managed, and what types of assurances are obtained to show that the materials are handled properly and legally by downstream vendors throughout the recycling chain, and what criteria does the agency use to select a recycler, and is it primarily priced? These are some of the answers that we'd like to have, and we'll have you back. But just recently, the New York Times reported that both the Department of Energy and the EPA Inspector Generals have detected significant problems with the accuracy of Energy Star labels, with consumers buying products that are mislabeled. And this is a bad precedent for consumers and the environment, as consumers pay more for Energy Star products, yet these appliances fail to save energy. So how serious a problem is this, and what steps is the EPA taking to address this problem?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The agency takes the IG reports. They were IG reports, both at the Department of Energy and at the Environmental Protection Agency, spaced about 9 months apart, but basically said the same things. We have undertaken to develop a margin or a memorandum of agreement with our colleagues at the Department of Energy to more clearly define the roles of our agencies, and verification, which is the issue that's raised in the New York Times article and in the IG, is going to get a much greater prominence and clarity as to who's got that responsibility. So we both take the report, the IG reports, seriously, and we feel like we have put into place appropriate corrective action to address the issue.
Ms. Coleman, have any mislabeled Energy Star products shown up on the GSA schedules, and if so, what is GSA doing to ensure that federal agencies are not buying mislabeled products?
Madam Chair, I'm not aware of that occurring. I'll go back and find out if we know of anything that I'm not personally aware of at this time.
Okay, and let me then ask Mr. Stevenson, has the GAO investigated this matter, and if not, are there plans to do so?
We haven't investigated this matter, nor have we been asked to do so at this point.
Well, can you get back to us on this issue?
Yes.
Since it's brought up in the papers.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Okay.
Madam Chair, could I make
Yes.
one observation about Congressman Bill Bray and recycling?
Yes, please.
He's absolutely on the right track. There are very responsible recyclers in this country and abroad. The problem is there's not economic incentives for them to do their job right now because there's no federal legislation that controls electronic waste. Right now, some 20 states have various laws on the books that range from everything from landfill bans for computers, but there are currently no economic incentives to get those recyclers up to speed. There's probably more capacity right now than there is material to recycle because of that. Your state, California, has an advanced recovery fee approach where the consumer pays a certain amount to enable recycling at the end. The state of Maine and most of the other states have what's called an extended producer responsibility program where the manufacturer is required to take back computers and then recycle them in a responsible way. So that's why we called for in our 2005 report federal legislation on this issue, and we're not concerned. Export is just kind of an outgrowth of that. If we do a better job of procuring and managing end of life, we'll do a better job with the recycling of illegal exports at the end.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bilbray.
California being an example, we've got a surcharge on the products. How many facilities have we cited in California to finance that? In other words, where does those funds go? Do you know?
Well, right now, they in California, they go to the recyclers, but they go to the collection agents and the recyclers, exactly. And
Yeah.
According to Congressman Thompson, there is a state-of-the-art facility in Northern California. And I think you're going to hear on the third panel another recycler that can explain in more detail the importance of the way the computer is designed and how it's managed, the materials it's made of, how easy it is to take apart.
In fact, let me just, Thompson, his District 1 is so far north, we think of that as Southern
Right.
Oregon, okay? But it is this concern that we're quick to outlaw certain options,
Right.
but we're not proactive at providing the good options in there, basically saying, well, that's your problem. We're here to just make sure you dispose of it, but don't ask us to participate in helping to create those options. And the biggest concern I have, coming from a working class community, being born and raised there, is traditionally when you eliminate the other options, the bootleg options start being forced in. And then we're the first ones to scream, how could all this illegal dumping go on? How could this ever happen? Well, we've created a situation that basically makes it very, very tempting to go to that option because all the other options have not been made, the good options have not been made available because it wasn't our responsibility to provide the positive option. I think that we've got in government be more proactive at creating those positive options, and that our responsibility is not just to make sure that waste is not disposed of in the wrong way, but we have a responsibility to be proactive, like we did the freeways, and make sure there's a good option available to the capacity that we admit is there, 21 million metric tons. So hopefully we'll be able to see that cooperation. And when the states do have a responsibility, a right of control, but they also have a responsibility as a consumer, as a government agency, as we would say to consumers, that you have a responsibility to make sure your waste stream is managed appropriately when you throw it out. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Bilbray, and you see where we need to go. So we're going to have subsequent hearings on this matter, and there are two bills available to us now. And within those two bills, we might find a provision, Mr. Bilbray, where we can make the federal government more responsible in this regard. And I want to thank all the witnesses. This concludes the second panel. And I thank Mr. Jones, Mr. Stevenson, and Ms. Coleman for your testimony. You may be excused now. Thank you so much. We're now going to turn to the third and the final panel. And if they'll come up, Mr. Biddle, Mr. Casillas, Mr. Goss, and Mr. Littlehill. And you can stay standing, please. As you know, it's the policy of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform to swear in all witnesses before they testify. I'd like to ask all of you to raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. Thank you. You may be seated, and let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. I'll now take a moment to introduce our distinguished panelists. Mr. Michael Biddle is president and founder of MBA Polymers, Polymers, is that correct? Thank you. And which he started in Richmond, California in 1994, and previously Mr. Biddle served as principal of Michael Biddle and Associates, as research leader for Dow Chemical Company, and as an adjunct professor at St. Mary's College in Moringa, California. Mr. Gilbert Casillas is Vice President of Corporate Responsibility for Dell Incorporated, where he oversees the company's global diversity, sustainability, and corporate philanthropy functions. He previously served as chairman of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, as general counsel of the Department of Air Force, and as a co-chairman of the U.S. Census Monitoring Board. Mr. Rick Goss manages the Information Technology Industry Council's Environmental Leadership Council, which promotes the Council's positions on electronics recycling, materials, content, and design, and green procurement. Mr. Goss represents the electronics industry before elected officials, regulators, and the media, and he has testified on behalf of high-tech manufacturers before Congress and in several states. He also works as international regulatory issues related to the environment, energy, and sustainability, and he participates in several federal and state planning teams and task forces on environmental priorities. His prior experiences include working for the Electronic Industries Alliance as Vice President of Environmental Affairs. Mr. Rich Littlehead, is that right? Littlehell. Okay, sorry. Is a senior at Yale College, majoring in history. During his summers at Yale, Rich has worked on a construction team for an investment firm and at an investment bank. And in 2008, Rich took a leave of absence from Yale to found a green electronics reuse and recycling company called urenew.com, which helps people, businesses, organizations, and government recycle their old electronics equipment. And finally, Mr. Jeff Almashuk founded the Green Electronics Council in 2005 to reinvest society's relationship with electronics. In 2006, the Green Electronics Council was selected to oversee Electronics Product Environmental Assessment Tool, or EPEAT, the Global Green Certification Program for electronics. Mr. Omachuk was selected to serve as the executive director for both the Council and EPEAT. His prior experiences include founding a consulting and training practice and working as an engineer in Silicon Valley. And I ask that each of the witnesses now give a brief summary of their testimony and keep this summary under 5 minutes in duration. Your complete written statement will be included in the hearing record. So we'll now start with Mr. Biddle. You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Chairwoman Watson, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I would like to commend the committee for recognizing the importance of this subject and its relevance to some of the other challenges facing our country today. I started MBA Polymers over 15 years ago to implement a more sustainable way to manufacture plastics. And I did it for a couple of reasons. The biggest perhaps is because I was watching this country consume about 100 billion pounds each and every year of plastics and throw over 90% of that in landfills. The less than 10%, more like 6 or 7% that we manage to collect for recycling, most of it ends up overseas, as Representative Bilbray has already pointed out. And I thought there was a better way to use this valuable resource. NBA Polymers is now the world, the world leader at mining and recycling plastics from end-of-life durable goods such as computers, electronics, and automobiles. We're headquartered in Richmond, California, where we have an office and research center. However, we build our manufacturing plants, which are the most advanced plastics recycling plants on the face of the planet, overseas. We build them in Asia and we build them in Europe because this is where the collection infrastructure for end-of-life durable goods like electronics has been developed. Our company's been recognized for breakthrough technologies like awards from the World Economic Forum, Tech Pioneer, Intel Corporation's International Environmental Award, and the Thomas Alva Edison Award for Innovation. And we were just named one of the top 100 clean tech companies in the world. On one side of our business, we mine the plastics from the materials left over after electronics and automobile recyclers recover the materials from end-of-life products. We take what is called their shredder residue, which is a complex mixture of materials that would otherwise be landfilled or incinerated. And from this, we recover a number of different plastics and even some of the metals that they missed. By working very closely with literally hundreds of computer and electronic recyclers all over the world, we know firsthand the breadth of approaches to collect, transport, and recycle end-of-life computers and electronics. We have seen the most primitive to the most sophisticated recycling approaches and technologies and everything in between. On the other side of our business, we sell our recycled plastics to some of the largest IT, electronics, and automobile companies in the world. So we also know firsthand the challenges and opportunities manufacturers face in using recycled materials in their new products. So I hope this explains why I'm here to witness at your hearing today. My testimony can be summarized very simply. We believe that the U.S. is missing both a timely leadership and an enormous economic opportunity by following our current practice of mostly wasting our unique and valuable resources. The U.S. has the largest deposit of end-of-life electronic equipment in the world, as we've already heard some of the other speakers testify to. You might say, from our perspective as a recycling and mining company, that we have the richest above-ground mines in the world. And to kind of put this in perspective, if you look at North America with a population of over 300 million people, we generate, as Representative Bilbray already pointed out, over 20 million tons of e-waste a year. And I'm using e-waste in the sense that the EU defines it, anything with a cord or a battery, just so we understand the definition. That's almost 70 kilograms per each person in North America. By contrast, Europe, with about twice our population, generates less e-waste, and that amounts, so they end up generating less than 1/3 per person than what we do here in the United States per year. And in Asia, if you look at the other extreme, with a very large population and much less e-waste, they only generate about 5% per person per year compared to the United States. Now, much of the obsolete electronics in the U.S. Are stored in closets and garages, and I know my family's guilty of that. But the majority of the rest is disposed of in landfills or incinerators. The EPA estimates that less than 20% of even the high-value portions of this e-waste stream is recycled. And unfortunately, this small amount that is collected for recycling is mostly shipped overseas to developing countries, often without the knowledge or means to recycle the equipment and materials in a way that protects the workers or the local environment. We've already referred to the shows on 60 Minutes, National Geographic, and the hundreds of news stories talking about what happens when e-waste is handled inappropriately and the potentially disastrous consequences. And most of the e-waste that is handled inappropriately comes from the United States. So, 3 things that we'd like to point out at this hearing. Firstly, our country should take a leadership position in the responsible management of our large collection of e-waste. We are one of the last developed countries to have a national policy for these wastes, even though we have the largest amounts of this waste in the world. Secondly, and just as importantly, we're missing a significant opportunity to reap some enormous economic benefits by recovering these materials of this equipment domestically. Examples include shovel-ready green jobs. The scrap recycling industry here in the United States already employs over 85,000 people and generates over $85 billion in revenues, and we throw away a great deal of resources. This industry is ready to capture those resources and generate jobs and generate revenues. There's enormous energy savings that can be realized by reusing materials compared to making them from new. If you just look at metals and plastics, for example, they require as little as 10% of the energy required to making them from virgin materials. I can't think of hardly any other opportunities where we can slash 90% of the energy use. And there are also concurrent significant greenhouse gas savings from using recycled materials. So let me just put a few metrics on the table so you can kind of understand the magnitude of these savings. And I'm going to focus on plastics not just because we're a plastics recycler, but because it's the last major material category to be recycled anywhere in the world, including the United States. The EPA estimates that less than 7% of our plastics are recycled in the U.S., and the majority of that, about 75% of that, is actually shipped overseas for recycling. So there's a huge opportunity here that we're not capturing. If we were to only recover 1/2 of the plastics from end-of-life electronics and automobiles, and this is very conservative because we recover much higher amounts of metals from what percentage of these end-of-life goods we actually recycle in the U.S., we could save over 9 billion barrels of oil per year, something like 15 billion kilowatt hours of energy per year, and over 5 billion pounds of CO2 from being emitted to the atmosphere every year. I have other examples of potential savings in my written testimony. So thirdly and finally, the U.S. government can use its large purchasing power to accelerate the realization of these benefits. Manufacturers are often reluctant to use new materials, particularly recycled materials. And recyclers are reluctant to make the necessary expensive investments in plant and equipment unless they know that they have reliable supplies of raw material and a market for their recycled products. The U.S. government can prime the pump and help drive the market for recycled materials like plastics. Federal and state government policies to procure recycled paper, for example, were instrumental in driving up the availability of recycled paper and driving down the costs. There already exists in a part of the Solid Waste Act dealing with federal procurement that instructs government agencies to procure such items composed of the highest percentage of recovered materials practicable. This policy seems to have mostly been focused on paper, and we believe there remains a huge opportunity to release the value in our e-waste streams. This would in turn create jobs, secure resources, save energy, reduce greenhouse gases, and protect people and the environment. I think these are all benefits that we'd like to see happen. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Mr. Casillas, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Ranking Member Bilbray, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the chance to be here today to talk about Dell's commitment to being the greenest technology company on the planet and how we work with the federal government to help achieve its environmental, energy, and performance goals. For Dell, responsibly reducing environmental impacts and economic costs depends on three things: improving our own operations, encouraging the supply chain, and empowering our customers to reach their environmental goals. The first place Dell looks is within our walls. We already have met our goal of achieving operational carbon neutrality by reducing our energy use, purchasing green power where we can, and offsetting the rest. We source about 35% of our U.S. energy use from green power, and we aspire to 100%. In fact, we just completed construction of a 516-panel solar structure at our Round Rock, Texas headquarters. Just by taking some basic energy efficiency steps in our own facilities, we reduced our facilities' energy consumption 3% last year and will save nearly $6 million annually. In addition to improving our own operations, our second goal is to work with our suppliers to expand environmental improvements into the supply chain. For example, we now require our primary suppliers to measure and publicly report their greenhouse gas emissions, and we ask them to set improvement goals of their own and set expectations for their suppliers. We can make the biggest difference, though, through our third goal, by helping our customers achieve their goals around performance, cost, and environmental stewardship. IT is a big part of the solution to the challenge of reducing energy consumption. According to a recent report, for every extra kilowatt hour of electricity used to power IT tools, the U.S. economy saves 10 times that much. We offer customers various services and solutions to address their energy and environmental needs, including energy efficiency calculators, our Green Print Advisor, and a data center capacity planner. We were the first tech company to offer customers carbon offsets. Dell leads the industry in packaging solutions, shrinking volume, increasing recycled content, and increasing the use of recyclable packaging material. We are the first manufacturer to offer free computer recycling to consumers worldwide, and we've been providing responsible recycling services for more than a decade. We regularly audit our resuppliers to the highest standards of responsible disposition. And Dell is the first major computer manufacturer to ban the export of non-working electronics to developing countries. We bring this experience to the table with our biggest customer, the federal government. President Obama's new executive order requires federal agencies to work to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to buy environmentally responsible products and services. We help by participating in the creation of environmental procurement standards, as well as by providing tools, technology, and services. We participate in many partnerships to drive environmental standards, including as an original and active participant in both EPEAT and Energy Star. And we support EPEAT's efforts to become a global standard. Many of our green products are described in my written testimony, but some that I'm most proud of include our more than 90 EPEAT products, most rated as gold, and our broad Energy Star offerings. We were the first to announce a family of Energy Star servers, the first to announce Energy Star 5.0 products, and all of our displays are now Energy Star. We also help our customers rethink their data center operations, including through virtualization, the technology enabling a single server to act as multiple servers, reducing the equipment, power, cooling, and space. In fact, we've worked with EPA to assess EPA's own data center and computer use. Many of our high-volume products come with power management already enabled, allowing systems to be powered down when not in use and cutting electricity consumption by up to 78%. And for all our displays, we are transitioning to LED backlight technology, which is more energy efficient and is mercury-free. In conclusion, Dell applauds your efforts to help the federal government to lead by example with environmentally responsible procurement. Madam Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Goss.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee. ITI is a trade association representing 43 high-tech and electronics manufacturers in the information and communications technology sector, including Dell. Through our Environmental Leadership Council, we also represent several dozen additional prominent manufacturers in the high-tech sector. Our member companies have long been leaders in sustainability. Many exceed the requirements on environmental design and energy efficiency and lead the way in product stewardship efforts. I should also note that Newsweek magazine recently issued its 2009 Green Rankings of America's 500 largest corporations based on their overall environmental performance, policies, and reputation. Our members occupy 4 of the top 5 positions and 14 of the top 40 slots overall. ITI and our member companies are strong supporters and active participants in Energy Star and EPEAT. Both of these programs promise valuable and concrete market rewards to those leadership companies that make significant time and resource investments. I should note that Energy Star is a required criterion under EPEAT, and that members of ITI and our Environmental Leadership Council dominate the EPEAT registry and presently manufacture 90% of the 419 EPEAT gold-rated products. I have 4 recommendations I'd like to offer in the area of Energy Star and EPEAT, if I may. Number 1 is to increase federal government procurement of Energy Star and EPEAT-rated products. Purchasing requirements for Energy Star and EPEAT products are already included in the FAR. President Obama's new executive order on federal leadership in environmental, energy, and economic performance includes specific provisions on procuring Energy Star and EPEAT electronic equipment. ITI supports this commitment and looks forward to working with the administration and Congress on its fulfillment. Number 2 is to provide targeted funding for education and outreach efforts. The largest and most immediate opportunity to secure additional energy and cost savings is by educating purchasers about the benefits of buying Energy Star and EPEAT qualified products. Congress should consider funding for initiatives to promote broader awareness on energy efficiency in the Energy Star program, on effective use of power management features incorporated into ICT products and systems, and on the life cycle benefits of purchasing EPEAT products. Number 3, maintain the focus of the Energy Star program on product energy use. U.S. EPA is considering a potential expansion of the Energy Star program to factor, quote, additional energy impacts into the specification. The success of the Energy Star label is due in large part to the fact that it is objectively measurable and verifiable. By focusing solely on the attribute of energy consumption of a particular product model, Energy Star offers product purchasers a straightforward and objective means of evaluating the energy efficiency of that product. And finally, number 4, provide additional funding and oversight of EPEAT. Manufacturers want to see EPEAT succeed and become the premier international procurement program for green electronics. The administration of the EPEAT program is currently funded solely by manufacturer registration fees. The program is expanding at a rapid pace, but there has been no additional government support to revise the original standard or provide for the long-term stability of this important program. In addition, EPEAT is a federal procurement requirement and is being increasingly recognized in international venues and by numerous private purchasers. However, the EPEAT program is managed by a small third-party single-source provider. ITI encourages Congress to provide additional funding and oversight of EPEAT to make sure this important program succeeds. We also have recommendations in my written testimony on ensuring harmonization of procurement within federal agencies, relying on advanced printing solutions, and having the federal government rely more on video conferencing. I should also make a couple of comments here about asset management and recycling. ITI members offer comprehensive asset management and product recycling services to the federal government as well as to our commercial and institutional customers. In fact, our companies have provided for the proper recovery and management of well over 2 billion pounds of used electronics products. Functional equipment is typically refurbished and returned to commerce for environmentally beneficial reuse. Our members ensure that older or broken units are first used for spare parts as appropriate and then recycled in an environmentally sound manner. ITI members also use significant quantities of recycled materials, including glass, metals, and plastics, in new generations of our products, thus creating demand that helps sustain markets for these materials. ITI and our members have been working in close coordination with U.S. EPA and other stakeholders to develop a set of responsible recycling, or R2 practices. The R2 practices, which are in the process of becoming a recognized standard, will allow government, commercial, institutional, and residential consumers alike to know that their obsolete products will be properly managed. Finally, a couple of words on the overall energy, climate, and economic benefits of ICT systems and services. Our sector plays a critical role in helping address major strategic challenges, including energy security, economic competitiveness, and the transition to a clean energy economy. The Smart 2020 report issued by the Climate Group recently concluded that ICT strategies for energy efficiency could reduce up to 15% of global emissions by 2020. The U.S. addendum to that report indicates that ICT strategies could reduce annual U.S. carbon emissions by up to 22% by 2020, which translates into energy and fuel savings of $140 to $240 billion. We have two very specific recommendations in this regard. One is to drive energy efficiency considerations into federal enterprise-level ICT procurement. We are strong supporters of an amendment drafted by Representative Anna Eshoo and Senator Mark Udall, directing each federal agency to collaborate with OMB to create an implementation strategy for the purchase and use of energy-efficient information and communications technologies and practices. And second, we support provision to direct the Department of Energy to create metrics to determine the annual energy rating of enterprise-level ICT systems. ICT energy efficiency programs assist utilities in sharing information and best practices. This will drive more meaningful demand mitigation programs that will yield dramatic energy efficiency savings more quickly. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Littlehale, proceed.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Rich Littlehale, and I am a co-founder of YouRenew.com, a company that is focused on helping people, businesses, cities, and other organizations find the best outlet for their old electronics, whether that be our specialty of remarketing the devices through retail channels or sending the devices to our partner recyclers to be broken down and reused. Today, I plan on briefly discussing three things. First, I'll give a brief overview of our company. Second, I will discuss what we believe are three main market needs to increase remarketing and recycling rates. And third, I will talk about how our company is trying to meet these market needs and provide our service to individuals, companies, and governments. My co-founder and I started the company in May of 2008 at the end of my junior year at Yale University, after noticing the low national recycling and reuse rates for electronics. After much research, we believe that reuse is the highest form of recycling because these devices' lives can be extended in the hands of someone who might not be able to afford brand new ones. I took last year off from school to get the company started. We have since raised capital, grown from 2 to close to 20 people in the last 7 months, and have recently hired an experienced CEO to continue to scale the company. I'm now splitting my time between working at URenew and finishing my senior year at Yale. After over a year speaking with some of the best minds in the country on reuse and recycling and working nonstop to attract and serve customers, I believe we have arrived at 3 critical needs for a successful recycling and remarketing service. The first is incentive. Traditionally, organizations and people are charged to have their electronics recycled responsibly. At URenew, we actually pay these organizations and people for their old devices that we can put back into use. This helps offset the cost of equipment that needs to be recycled. This is both a win for the organization and for our electronics recycler partner. By partnering with partner recyclers, we can move more quickly on helping more people and organizations manage their end-of-life solutions. The second need is transparency. There is concern over where the electronics go and if they're being recycled properly. Our goal is to continue to be the most transparent company on the market and only work with electronics recyclers with the highest environmental standing and credibility. The third need is convenience. We compete against the trash can. Much of our innovation is making it easier for the consumer to send in their old electronics. While we've achieved great success so far, our company's journey has just begun, and it's obvious to us that a great market need still exists. For example, as you can see on the screen, we recently worked with the City of New Haven to help them recycle and remarket their old electronics. These electronics were literally in a box in the closet of the IT manager's office who did not know what to do with them. We helped explain the proper channels for use and recycling and have since created a great relationship. Our vision for URenew is to provide full lifecycle management for individuals and large organizations. That means, first, helping them make the best decisions about which electronics to buy through standards like EPEAT, and second, using our service to help them find the right outlet for the reuse or recycling of those devices. In the next year, we at URenew are aiming to work with electronics manufacturers, recyclers, individuals, and the U.S. government to set up a more efficient and transparent framework for the second life of electronics. We will work hard with these partners to continue to craft the best incentives, transparency, and convenience. In conclusion, we are ready and willing to help provide the best service and excited for what the future holds. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Mr. Omachek, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair Watson and Ranking Member Bilbray, for this opportunity to testify before your committee today. My name is Jeff Olmelchuk, and I'm the Executive Director of the Green Electronics Council and of EPEAT. The Green Electronics Council is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon, with the mission of reinventing society's relationship with electronics. The invitation to testify today said that the committee was interested in the government's procurement and disposal of electronics products. I'm going to focus more on the purchasing end, but I want to clearly make the point that the two are related. If you buy greener electronics, you will be disposing of greener electronics. The invitation also said that the committee was interested in learning more about EPEAT, the Electronics Product Environmental Assessment Tool, and about the government's use of EPEAT to buy greener IT products, so I'll focus my comments on those subjects. EPEAT is a comprehensive green purchasing system for electronics that covers the environmental impacts of products' complete life cycle, including reduced toxics in the product, designed for extended life and more efficient recycling, energy efficiency, greener packaging, and EPEAT also requires that the manufacturer provide certain services, including end-of-life take-back of batteries, packaging, and the product itself. EPEAT makes it as easy to specify and buy full-scope green products as Energy Star makes it to buy energy-efficient products. Further, EPEAT-registered products cost no more than conventional products, and EPEAT costs purchasers nothing to use. EPEAT was developed and launched with the support of EPA and hundreds of volunteer stakeholders from all facets of society, including environmental NGOs, industry, researchers, large purchasers, and public officials. I think you've heard a lot of support in this hearing so far for the parties that have participated. EPEAT is now marginally financially self-supporting. It represents a unique and successful public-private partnership that is changing an industry using market forces rather than regulation. The U.S. federal government uses EPEAT to specify green electronics for its own purposes. The Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, and 2 executive orders require all agencies of the U.S. federal government to satisfy 95% of their need for electronics with products that are EPEAT registered. Many other organizations around the world also use EPEAT to specify and buy green electronics, including federal agencies, states, cities, education systems, hospitals, and corporations from Brazil to Thailand. These purchasers' combined contracts for EPEAT registered products has created a $60 billion market incentive for manufacturers to make greener products. This market for green electronics has attracted the participation of leading American manufacturers, including HP, Dell, Apple, most European and Asian industry leaders, and many small innovative manufacturers globally. Now that I've introduced you to EPEAT, I'd like to urge this committee to do a few things that I think could make a huge difference. First, and Mr. Goss alluded to this, despite the fact that 2 executive orders and the FAR require all agencies of the federal government to buy EPEAT registered products, many government contracts present catalogs of products to federal purchasers that include many non-EPEAT registered products, and they do not identify which products are EPEAT registered, making it very difficult for purchasers to comply with federal regulation. I urge Congress to require that government contracts and contractors clearly identify EPEAT registered electronics so that federal purchasers can more easily comply with federal purchase regulations. Second, the U.S. government has for many years done a good job of using their own purchasing power to create demand for greener products. But this doesn't go far enough. Promoting green purchasing to the public based on sound life cycle-based programs educates consumers on what they can do and strengthens demand for environmentally preferable products. EPEAT is the program vetted by the U.S. government and used for its own purchasing of electronics. EPA should support and promote EPEAT and other sound green purchasing systems to the public. Third, Congress justifiably has interest in developing a national e-waste recycling program. We fully support that. It's a critical environmental need that can only be accomplished by regulation, probably. However, recycling is fundamentally an end-of-the-pipe activity that recovers perhaps a few % of the environmental investment in electronic products. To fully address the life cycle impact of electronics, we must address them earlier in the product life cycle. By specifying EPEAT, purchasers apply market pressure to change the design, manufacturing, and service practices of electronics makers globally and reduce impacts throughout the life cycle, including making products more easily and efficiently recycled. Again, if you buy greener electronics, you will be disposing of greener electronics. So buying greener electronics as defined by EPEAT should be recognized and supported as a necessary part of any long-term solution to e-waste. Finally, EPEAT was made possible through the support and involvement of EPA, Department of Energy, and other federal agencies. EPEAT is a working example of an innovative and powerful new model of public-private partnership that is using market forces rather than regulation to drive better materials management practices throughout a complex supply chain. We urge Congress to increase support for EPEAT and similar programs. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before this body. I look forward to your continued and increased support for EPEAT. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to thank all the witnesses for your testimony, and we're now going to move to the question period, and we will proceed under a 5-minute rule. And I'd like to first start with Mr. Biddle. With all the concerns about IT recycling operations we have heard about in the news, some people say it's actually better for the environment if we just warehouse the old IT products or even send them to landfills where there's likely to be some protection against the leaching of toxic components. And this may seem illogical, but is there any truth to this statement?
Thank you. I think that's it's actually a good question because I've heard similar sentiment before. I think from my oral testimony you probably surmised that I believe there's a lot of value to be recovered if it's done appropriately, and I think that's the key, that it be done appropriately and that that the e-waste be handled by companies that have the technology and the knowledge to recycle these products appropriately. And let me just use one example that might highlight this issue. The European Union enacted what's called WEEE legislation, waste electrical and electronic legislation, a number of years ago, and it was primarily initially done to protect the environment, both their local environment and the environment of countries where their e-waste was also being exported. What they have found since, and they figured that this was going to be a costly enterprise to do this, what they have found since is that, A, it didn't cost as much as they thought, and in fact sometimes it pays for itself. As we've heard, some of these products can pay for themselves from the recycling or the reuse. And secondly, what they found is that more importantly, or just as importantly as protecting the environment, they're now recovering valuable resources that their manufacturers in Europe are using to make new products more competitively and more sustainably. So I hope does that answer your question?
That alludes to it. Does the recycling industry have data regarding total amounts of e-waste generated are sent for reuse, are recycled domestically, are exported abroad?
There's a number of different figures out there that have been compiled by different organizations. In my oral testimony, I alluded to some, and in my written testimony, there's a little bit more data. The number that I used, again, is all electrical and electronic equipment by the EU definition, anything with a battery or a cord, and that's more than 20 million metric tons per year of e-waste estimated to be in North America. A good portion of that, of course, is in the United States. I don't have the particular figure for what percentage of that is in the United States. Of that, EPA did a study that I also alluded to that about 17 or 18% of e-waste is collected for recycling in the U.S., but the e-waste that they looked at was just what I call the high-value e-waste, the most prominent e-waste. So these were computers and peripherals and cell phones. That stuff does have a much higher recycling rate for the reuse reasons we heard about and the inherent value in some of the materials in that particular type of equipment. So that's overestimates, I think, the recycling rate for all of electronics. And the majority of that 18% is shipped overseas, not recycled here in the U.S.
Mr. Goss, some experts say that it's important to design IT products to make them easier to recycle, for example, by using more modular construction and reducing the use of certain kinds of chemicals. And others say that this is not practical and it's more important to design more effective and environmentally friendly recycling processes like smart shredders that can separate the material. What do you think is the best approach, and what other than funding do you think federal agencies can do to help in this regard?
Thank you. On your first question here, I think our companies have demonstrated through their actual achievements here what they're able to do based on customer demand, based on competition, market competition, et cetera. As I noted in my testimony here, our member companies make 90% of the 400-plus gold-rated EPEAT products here. So our companies are competing against one another and in the marketplace here, and frankly the federal government support through the FAR, through the executive order for EPEAT and Energy Star is a major driver here. So what our companies are demonstrating is that they can and will, in the absence of regulation, just based on competitive advantage here, design in these types of features. And as Mr. Amelchuk has noted, EPEAT is a full life cycle assessment going all the way through the design, through the active use of the equipment, through its beneficial reuse and appropriate recycling here. In terms of the federal government, I think I'll go back to a couple of the key points that I made in my testimony here. The federal government has a major role to play in terms of helping to drive that market demand, in terms of making sure that EPEAT and Energy Star rated products are purchased at the levels as prescribed in the executive order and in the FAR, and continuing to provide that market incentive to our companies to make these improvements.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Bill Wraith, Ranking Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'd like to follow a different line of questioning here. Mike, when we can talk about that there's a lot of economic opportunities for recycling, but it's not equal. I mean, you're willing to admit that there are portions of these products that are not going to be economically viable to recycle, right? But I think anyone who's worked with the waste streams will understand that that doesn't mean in the future that material may not be very profitable to recycle. Wouldn't you agree that one of the things that we need to look at while we're talking about recycling is the concept of stockpiling or disposing or storing the other material that may not be today in isolation, because that's one of the things you get. You've got it in isolation, you've got it separated. Once you've got it separated, that's a huge part, isn't it, of being able to make it recyclable for the future.
Again, another good question. I agree with your general statement that some things are more expensive to recycle than others, and I would allude again to my comment about the European Union, where they found that a surprisingly amount of stuff is now paying for itself to be recycled. I think one of the more problematic materials would be CRT glass, for example, finding a positive value for that from cathode ray tubes, TVs, and the like. As far as storing the stuff, I'm a little reluctant to go down that path because I think there's so much inherent value in the materials if the infrastructure were developed. It's a bit of a chicken and egg, and that's what the European Union found out. There's economies of scale associated with doing recycling and doing it economically as well as doing it environmentally soundly. And now that the economies of scale have been built out in Europe and parts of Asia, these recyclers have found that it's actually quite profitable to recycle the majority of electronic waste that comes their way.
But to interrupt here, there's a chicken and egg thing here.
Yep.
First of all, and a lot of it may be on the political process, just the entire environmental political process of saying no, no, no. That the fact is that if you're confronted with one of two options, recycle or site a disposal site, and make the siting of the disposal site compatible with future recycling, then you start creating the issue that there's more of a motivation to recycle because you can't just go down the cheaper, throw it into a landfill option.
Right. I think you're absolutely on the right track. Let me just say three things would make it easier for us to recycle these things economically in the U.S. The first is getting the stuff back. Clearly, we have more of this stuff in the U.S. than any other country in the world, so I think that's a huge opportunity as much as it is a problem. Just like in technology, getting fiber to your home or cable to your home, the last mile is the most expensive. Perhaps you're familiar with that concept. In recycling, it's just the opposite. It's the first mile is the most expensive. Getting recyclables out of the hands of consumers has always been the most expensive part of the recycling equation. If that infrastructure develops for collecting this material in an effective way, most of the other process pays for itself. So the first issue to solve is how can we collect it effectively and efficiently? And this is, again, something we can learn from people from countries in Europe and Asia. The second is, I think you've already alluded to it, make it easier for recyclers to develop their plants and stop throwing up so many barriers. And again, I'll give you an example.
Now, you're an example where you've developed it, you're a company in California, you're in California, but you don't have one site in the United States?
Raised over $100 million from investors right here in the U.S., gotten funding from the U.S. government agencies to develop the technology more than 10 years ago. And where are we exploiting that technology?
Now, most people in Washington say that you're one of those corporations that are just so mean-spirited that you're creating jobs overseas and don't care about the Americans.
I'm creating jobs overseas because that's where I can get my hands on the raw material. I can tell you there's no person in this country more frustrated than myself that I can't build plants here in the United States. And
what can we do to make it possible for you to do?
Well, the first one was getting the raw material on the electronics side. And on the second point, which you've already alluded to, make it easier for recyclers to make the investment. Because there is a risk. My investors demand of me that I show them a return on their money, and that has to do with risk-based. If I can get my hands on material in Europe and in Asia, that lowers the risk. My investors are happy to
But isn't a major problem, or a portion of that risk base, is that when you go in there, it's a whole lot different than saying, I plan on going in and building a facility here.
Yes.
The difference between going to an investor and saying, I'm planning on building a facility, as opposed to, I have a sited facility that is permitted and it's ready to go. That's a huge difference, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that is my point, too. Let's make it easier for recyclers to grow the infrastructure here in the U.S. And the first one's getting the raw material, but secondly is making the permitting process easier. The permitting process was much easier for us in Asia and Europe, and we're building our second plant right now in the UK, which will be the largest such plant in the world. We would like to duplicate that plant here in the U.S., and we're ready to do it tomorrow. I can employ the funds tomorrow if we can get over some regulatory hurdles. So this happens to do with automotive shredder residue, not the topic for this panel right here, but that material, the point I can make with that, that material is already available in the United States. 10 billion pounds of it we put in landfill every year, already collected, already concentrated, and I can't build a plant to mine it like the plant we're building in the UK right now because of regulatory barriers. So I need some help on that. And finally, on the procurement part, I think the rest of the panelists talked better than I can on the procurement end. That helps recyclers to have a market for recycled materials.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, just an example of being in California. I served 6 years on the California Coastal Commission, and there's issues that sort of the push and pull of government regulation. We're always looking at pushing, but no pull. And one of the things that the California Coastal Commission did that really has worked is where you had communities did not want to build hotels, visitor receiving facility, because the local pressure was, we don't want those tourists in our town, you know, we don't want this hotel in our neighborhood. But what finally happened was, without the hotels, people were renting out homes in neighborhoods, and people were so outraged about, wait a minute, I don't want people renting next to my house that are just going to be here for 2 weeks. I bought into a single-family residential area, and the Coastal Commission finally said, okay, you can outlaw those short-term rentals, but only if you build an alternative, the hotel. Now you got communities that historically have blocked hotels being motivated to do the responsible thing, and I'd like to see us try to see how, as a policy, our environmental regulations can create that carrot and stick approach at push and that pull. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just picking up on the last point, I think it would be a mistake to indicate that there's no recycling going on in the United States. There is metal recycling from electronic waste. I'm aware of one plant in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. I'm aware of another plant in Arizona where we, in fact, are recycling, and there is a market here, though the gentleman's point is correct that site location for such plants obviously is always a challenge. But it would be a misimpression, I think, to suggest that none of that goes on in the United States, that all of it goes on overseas. That's not true.
I completely agree, and I'm sorry, I didn't want to leave that complete impression. I said there were 85,000 jobs here in the U.S.
The Congressman Yield, before you came, there was that point that there is this activity. It's just that proportionally it's way off what we produce.
Of course. And some of it is, as you suggest, Mr. Bilbray, it's permitting, it's licensing. Sometimes, with the best of intention for environmental rationales, we actually are preventing the ability to do this kind of recycling and to get that market vibrant here in the United States. Let me begin, Madam Chairwoman, by congratulating Dell in particular for their leadership. I mean, it really is impressive that a company such as yours would step up to this issue, not ignore it, and take it under their wing as an important part of their corporate responsibility. And I just say that as somebody coming from 20 years in the industry, I'm impressed, and I thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Congressman.
Let me ask this of our two Dell reps. Could you support, and how might it work from your point of view, legislation that would support the establishment of national regulations for e-waste take back and recycling?
Thank you, Congressman. Just to clarify, I work for ITI, the trade association that represents Dell among several dozen other companies. Let me start by saying that about 4.5 years ago, early 2005, our industry came to Congress and asked Congress to consider national comprehensive electronics recycling legislation. At that time, only 2 states, California and Maine, had e-waste laws on the books, and our industry had a strong preference for a consistent federal approach as opposed to a hodgepodge or a patchwork of state approaches. Well, in the absence of federal action over the last 4+ years, we now have 20 states, Wisconsin being the latest this past week, plus the city of New York with their own distinct electronics recycling laws on the books. This has created quite a bit of confusion, additional costs for our member companies, consumer confusion in addition, because no 2 states are alike. Some are similar in terms of their approaches, but they have different product scopes, different financing requirements, registration, reporting, etc. I think everybody understands the picture here. We would still be very interested in having a discussion with this committee and with Congress about where we can go as a group of stakeholders, including the recyclers, the retailers, the NGOs, EPA, and other government players here about how to try to bring a solution to this. I would also add that we've been working with Congressman Green and Congressman Thompson for well over a year on the specific bill that they mentioned in the first panel here, which has to do with controls on electronics exports. Two quick points I'd like to make on that is we strongly support controls on the export of obsolete equipment going to non-OECD countries. That is a very legitimate issue, and it's something that, as manufacturers, we would like to see resolved here. I would also add as a caveat, though, we want to make sure that we are allowed to continue with our beneficial product refurbishment programs. Some of our members export large amounts of used late model equipment for appropriate repair, refurbishment, and subsequent resale into global commerce. That's a very environmentally beneficial outcome, and we want to make sure we get the most resources and the most use out of those products here. So we want to make sure that while we have restrictions on export of obsolete products, that we still maintain some reasonable ability to move goods for proper refurbishment. Thank you.
And following up on that, if I may, Mr. Goss, is it Goss?
Goss, yes.
Goss, excuse me. Does IIT support the idea of prohibiting exports of hazardous e-waste?
We support controls on the export of recycled or obsolete material for recycling. I will point out that an absolute prohibition on the export of used products for recycling would actually create a regime, a U.S. regime, where you can't, for instance, export a laptop at all, but you'd still, under RCRA, be allowed to export a drum of hazardous waste to the same developing country under notice and consent. I think there needs to be some reasonable authority given to EPA to come up with some rules on when and where certain shipments could be made, but we do support controls on the export of obsolete equipment to countries that don't have the capacity to manage it safely.
Right. Okay, great. And my final question, Madam Chairwoman, to Mr. Biddle. In your testimony, you note that metal recyclers capture 90% of the metals from collected and recycled and end-life automobiles. And you contrast that with sort of the sorry state of 5 to 10% of the plastics. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit, because one of the things that struck me, having done a little bit of work on the metal side, is that a niche market was created for the metal extraction and recycling of those metals on the metal market. And frankly, so long as the price of metals was relatively good, it makes for a viable recycling industry and market. I don't know that we have a similar analogous situation for plastics. What do we need to do to try to help spur the creation of such a secondary market?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for the question, because that question is near and dear to my heart, as you might imagine. First, let me say on the metal side, and we work with the largest metal recyclers in the world. We know them very well, and I've worked with them for 15 years. If you look back at the history of metal recycling, steel was the first metal recycled because it's easy to recycle. All it takes is a magnet to separate steel from everything else. There was no such thing as a magnet for copper, aluminum, magnesium, and some of the other non-ferrous metals, the non-steel metals. So that material, up until about 2 decades or 3 decades ago, was not recovered in high volumes. It was hand-picked, and much of it actually ended up in the waste stream 30 years ago. Technology came along to now separate those materials using color, density differences, electrical differences, magnetic property differences, and so forth, and now that material has an incredibly high recycling rate because the technology came along, and as you pointed out, the inherent value of the materials is there. Plastics, on average, particularly from computer and electronic equipment, is on par on a price per waste basis or cost per weight basis with aluminum. So it is a valuable material. We know the recycle rates for aluminum are quite high because it is a valuable material. Plastics are roughly in the same ballpark as far as value, and much more valuable than steel on a price per weight basis. So the material has inherent value. It's that the technology to sort all these materials from each other was not available, just like it was not for non-ferrous. That technology is now available, has been developed over the last decade, not just by our company, but by other companies, and is now starting to be employed. So the technology barrier was probably the first barrier. The second has been the collection. Again, if I just focus on electrical and electronic equipment, we're building plants overseas quite a lot right these days, simply because we can get our hands on the byproducts from the electronics recyclers, which is predominantly mixed plastics. So our technology is being employed to do that. If that material was being collected here in the U.S., I would be happy to build plants here in the U.S., as would other recyclers.
Thank you. Your time is up. Mr. Bilbray.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I think that one of the things we don't talk about we think of these in isolation, the whole issue of fossil fuels being phased out. This is a major part of fossil fuel use, at least oil, is into these plastics. So as those supplies drop, the demand for recycling is going to go up. Mr. Littlehale, there's this issue, we're going to shift totally over, and that's the data security on this issue. And you're sort of the expert on that, on the reuse, the transport on there. What do you do to make sure of that security issue? Where's your safety valves in there? Because you're actually picking up hardware, redesigning and reusing it, so there's this potential. How do you address that issue?
We take a variety of steps, which start with giving the customer the instructions on how to data clear his or her device with the standards of the manufacturer, which usually are the recommended version. Once we take the device into our facility, what we do is we have a technician go through and hand data clear the device through the same specifications that the manufacturer recommends. We then use a service, which I'd be happy to write more about later, which we plug in and sort of does a clean wipe. And then we, for cell phones, for instance, which is the highest volume of what we use, for smartphones, we wipe the operating system and then reinstall the operating system. This is one thing, data security in particular, that I think that if manufacturers developed an easier way to data clear, these devices would be more reusable. And that's something that would make the electronics greener in that sense, because they would be easier to reuse. And so we use the highest standards that are available currently and are constantly looking to improve.
And now, do you feel once you go through that there's a security, security is up to the level you would prefer, or do we need to continue to improve the ability to data clear?
I think that it's up to the level that the manufacturers. It's the best that we can do, that the manufacturers give, and also the extra service that we pay for as a company that specializes in the data clearing, and it's there's security software that's Department of Defense certified as well, that's out there and available, mostly for computers, which, bigger computers we're actually not dealing with as much. We're more focused on sort of the handheld electronics, cell phones, MP3 players currently. But I do think that it could be better, only because it is a tedious process going through the hand wipe, going through the plugging and the wiping and the reinstalling and the data clearing. And if there was, BlackBerry actually, for instance, RIM Technologies is a leader in this field and is doing a pretty good job with it's about 5 minutes and the whole thing's wiped.
Well, let me just say, in the 90s, there were a lot of officials that wish they had your service. I know you weren't available; you were busy at grade school. But I want to thank you for that. And I think that, in all fairness, when we talk about this, we also got to remember that there is going to be some consultation with law enforcement. I'm sure that our law enforcement agencies have seen this as being a great tool, being able to get quote-unquote erased information. That obviously will be something that is dialogued into the formula. And thank you very much for having this hearing.
And I want to, the last two questions will go to Mr. Omachuk and Mr. Casillas. And I knew that bill would be heard. But I just want to raise these issues and end up with you, Mr. Casillas. First, with Mr. Omachuk, what are the EPEAT listed products and why are they so limited? And let me just go down my list and you can answer in response. And what is being done to add more products? What kind of federal support was involved in the development and implementation of EPEAT? And does the federal government still need to be involved, or can expansion and improvement of EPEAT be done with only private funding from now on? And then if you'll end up, Mr. Casillas, to what extent does the private sector regulate the safe disposal of used IT equipment? And are there any regulatory approaches proposed or enacted at the state level that would provide increased incentives for industry design for environment initiatives? And we'll end with you. So, Mr. Omachuk, if you could just combine all those questions into one response, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you for your question, Madam Chair. I think your first question was why the limited number of products in EPEAT, and I'd address that in two ways. The first is EPEAT covers a limited set number of types of products. Today it applies to laptops, desktops, and monitors. Those are the products that stakeholders chose to begin with because they are products purchased in volume by large institutional purchasers like the U.S. federal government, who is an important stakeholder in the process. Within that product set, I'm not sure if you were focusing on product types or numbers of products within that product set.
Both.
Okay. So within laptops, desktops, and monitors, the products that we cover today, we have at this point 1,300 some products from 40 plus manufacturers that are registered. The key thing is, I would say, is that the manufacturers choose which products to register. They present them to us. We don't go out and grab them from the manufacturers. And I think it's important to note that a manufacturer pays a fixed annual fee to participate in EPEAT. So for all the leading manufacturers that have at least one product registered in EPEAT, which is all the recognized multinationals, it costs them not 1 penny additional to register additional products. So there's really only one reason why they don't EPEAT register the products that they haven't chosen to EPEAT register, and that's because they don't meet the green criteria. So why don't the leading manufacturers register more of their products? It's a better question addressed to them. What would it take to add more products? Let me touch on what would it take to add more product types first. Stakeholders have begun the process to develop the green standards for printer-type products, as printers, fax machines, copiers, that kind of product. And for televisions, that process is underway. We develop EPEAT standards are developed by a broad range of stakeholders working in a public standards development process. So it's a long process. It's not 5 of us getting in a closet and dreaming up the criteria. It takes hundreds of people working through hundreds of meetings over a period of years to come to agreement, consensus across NGOs and manufacturers and others what the criteria are. So those are started. We have a product roadmap that includes servers and handheld cell phone products after that. So those products are kind of on the way. What would it take to add more products within the products we cover today? I think the key would be increased consumer awareness and consumer demand for green electronics. It is true that the majority of products registered in EPEAT are those sold to institutions, and that's because that's the market that requests them. As I said in my testimony, one of the things that EPA can do to increase the range of products is to promote EPEAT to the public. Today, we're in a bit of a chicken and the egg situation where manufacturers say they don't want to register, promote EPEAT to the public, and they don't want to EPEAT register their public products because the public doesn't recognize it. And of course, until they do, the public can't recognize it. There's nothing to recognize. And so we're in a bit of a chicken and the egg situation in the marketing, and EPA and the federal government could provide a real could break us out of that deadlock by simply promoting it to the public.
Okay.
You asked a couple more questions, but I realize I'm out of time. So.
Yeah, we're out of time, but I think we get the gist of it. I want to go to you, Mr. Casillas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Fundamentally, this is about good business, at least from Dell's perspective, and being a green business for us means we're going to be a successful business. So as we think about green technology, we think about it strategically, and if we can get ahead of the curve, we will be successful in the long term. And that's why all of the efforts, when our chairman declared we will be the greenest technology company on the planet, it was sort of like President Kennedy saying we're going to get to the moon by a certain period of time. Now we got to work all of those partnerships, a lot of hard work to try to make it happen. And among the things you asked about were disposal, and we have some very high standards around disposal. We audit our recyclers, for example. I mentioned in my testimony about banning the export of non-working equipment. The idea is to set the highest standards and push towards them. And, it's kind of like physical fitness. You sort of reach a level and you don't stop. You got to push to the next level. One, because it's the right thing to do and it's good for you. And secondly, because your competition is going to drive you to the next level in any event. In terms of the state level question you asked, I would say that We've been working with Congressman Green as well on some of the recycling laws at the state level. I think what we need is some incentives to make recycling more efficient, and I think the federal government in particular could help by creating further incentives for recycling.
I want to thank all of you. You know, these are emerging fields, and you know, I liken it to developing the H1N1 virus. People are complaining that there's not enough available. Well, they don't know the process that has to be done in the laboratory to grow what is necessary to put it in, the inoculation and all. And as I was listening to you this morning and now afternoon, we are trying to support you in the private sector as well as the public sector as you start to discover and develop and compete with each other. We're trying to do that in healthcare. Oh, I should never have gone there. But anyway, we understand all the pieces and the parts that it takes to come up with good policy. So that's the reason why we started off with the two members that were here with their bills, and we will then be amending their bills with some of the input we have today. I just want to say to all of you, thank you for what you're doing. We hope that we can consult with you as we make policy, and if there are any new pieces of information that you think will help us, don't fail to contact us. And with that, this hearing is adjourned, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
To all the witnesses.
Did you know that these guys were gay? No. Did you? No, I had no idea.
You guys calling me? What are you doing here?
Steve, dude, what the hell happened here?
It was all Steve's doing. If he hadn't been
if
so...
I hadn't what? I'm not the one who broke my promise.
Guys, why don't you just tell us what happened?
I was working my delts because Monday's my upper body day. This one said he'd spot me, then walks away to take a call from some guy he met last night.
I answered the phone. Terrible, isn't it?
Oh, do not test me with your sarcasm. How do you guys handle things like this?
Us?
Yeah.
Keep your relationship on track.
Oh, no. Our relationship, our friendship is,
This is purely professional.
Yeah.
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 I thought you were partners.
No, professional.
No.
Professional,
Yeah,
just
this
like
is,
you
look,
said.
look, the bottom line is, I'm sorry that your relationship's at a tough spot, but you guys got to pay for the damages.
Oh, I'm not paying for something that wasn't my fault.
Don't look at me. I was just defending myself.
Oh, where? Okay, keep talking. Okay.
Vete de aquí.
Se mueven.
I want you to show me.
Arena, please.
Oh, no way! Dwight Howard, Superman!
What's up?
Check this out. Bend this fork with your super strength. You know who my favorite basketball player is of all time? Jack Sikma, the best center who ever lived.
Hey, watch the road.
I'm okay, I got eyes in the back of
Yo,
my
watch
head.
out!
The secret to an explosive look?
L'Oreal's new telescopic explosion mascara with our spherical brush. Round to reach lashes from every angle. Result, every lash lengthened and fanned out. L'Oreal's new telescopic explosion mascara.
Warm Pillsbury cookies made with gooey Hershey's Mini Kisses. Spontaneous joy may occur.
Breakfast doesn't really start until the grands are on the table. Grands biscuits. Would it really be breakfast without them? Make breakfast grand.
Time to get the latte budget under control.
Trying to be smart with the family budget? Let Bounty help. It's thick and absorbent. In lab tests, Bounty absorbs twice as much as the bargain brand. Why use more when you can use less? Bring it with Bounty, the thick, quicker picker-upper.
The average monthly cell phone bill, $81. Straight Talk, only $30 for 1,000 minutes, 1,000 texts, and 30 megs of data. $45 gets unlimited minutes, texts, and data. Straight Talk, everything you need in a cell phone without a contract. Available only at Walmart.
Marcus, what you going to be for Halloween?
A nutcracker? You?
Nutcracker.
Yeah, good for you.
Change things up with IHOP's holiday hotcakes. Try gingerbread, eggnog, and pecan pie pancakes. IHOP. Come hungry, leave happy, and give a gift card.
We've got a confession.
If there's something that you need to tell us, you're too late.
The Closer's all-new episodes aren't over yet.
What does LA have in store for us today?
I wish I could say the usual.
The 3-week Closer event begins December 7th, only on TNT.
I'm self-employed. Gotta have health insurance. A serious illness can ruin me financially. So I got covered by Assurant Health.
I needed an affordable health plan to protect my family. So we got covered by Assurant Health.
Health insurance. You can't see it or touch it, but you know you need it to protect you and your family. For over 100 years, Assurant Health has offered more options, so you save by only paying for the coverage you want. Dan here chose options that fit his lifestyle and budget. $2 million in medical coverage and a locked-in rate for 2 years, plus a 15% discount just for being healthy. When Monica's kids get sick, her plan includes unlimited doctor visits and prescriptions. She can even get a dental plan. At Assurant Health, we simplify the process. With Express Yes, call today and be covered as early as tomorrow.
Now, family coverage starts as low as $10 per day. Call 1-800-809-6085 to apply now.
All new every Thursday. There's nothing funnier than pain and humiliation. Just as long as it's happening to somebody else. It only hurts when I laugh. All new every Thursday at 10 on True TV.
Ed, I know things went a little sideways last time we saw it.
Sideways? You tried to rob me.
Ed, even so, I would not greet a former colleague and a fellow Cold Warrior with that looked like a right cross, am I right?
Do me a favor, get rid of the candy stripe, will you?
Vamonos, baby. All kidding aside, I appreciate the Pasadena you threw me back there in Vegas.
I don't know. My mistake. Where's my painting jack?
I don't know. And frankly, the fact that you suspect me...
Gosh, about that. You've stolen paintings in the past.
So?
You know my hotel, you know my security system.
Ed, I'm coming clean with you here.
Where's my painting jack?
Ed, just take it easy, Ed.
Either you took it, you know who took it, or you can help me get it back.
You're not gonna believe this. But I had a dream last night. You were in it, Maria was in it. We were all right here, and you came and you asked me to do one last job with you. You know, I think you and I made a good team back there at the company.
Pack your bags, buddy. Answer it.
Bueno.
We do not want you helping at the line.
No, I'm gonna be checking out today.
Don't get involved.
No, just leave it on the same credit card.
You help him, you're a dead man.
I understand. Thank you so much. Thank you. Punk. Like a late check out of some kind of a federal crime.
Yeah. So, Jack.
What, Ed?
If you didn't do it, who did?
Come on! There's this guy in L.A. His name is Ray Anna Walt.
Breathtaking, isn't it?
How you doing? We're looking for Ray?
What a shame. He is not in gallery.
Who might you be?
I am Shmi, Mr. Anna Walt's assistant.
I'm sorry, Shmi? Your name is Shmi?
It is short for, well, what it is short for is far too hard for the American to pronounce. That is why I chose Shmi.
That's very interesting.
Shmi, where might Mr. Annawalt be?
Making a special delivery of a very special new piece to a very, very special client.
What piece is that?
Of course I can't tell you that.
Jack, he can't tell us that.
He can't tell us that. You can't tell us that?
Okay, how about this?
You can't tell us? Can you tell us? No?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for him. Can you tell us? Yes, I'll get one.
Hey, here's the problem. Each Steve is blaming the other one, therefore both are refusing to pay for the damages.
So sue their asses. What's the victim?
1, eviction is time-consuming, costly, and frequently unsuccessful. 2, technically they have until the end of the lease to complete the repairs.
Did you guys know they were gay?
You didn't? I wanted gay guys. They have money and they make improvements.
Oh, I heard they installed new kitchen tile.
Yeah, they also installed some barbells into the drywall.
I mean, it's probably just a lover's quarrel. I mean, maybe you guys should have a little heart-to-heart. You know, what first attracted them to each other, all the mushy stuff. Try to come back together.
That's gay.
Talk to them. Yeah. Try to come up with something better.
No, no, ladies, we had gone over there.
No, we went to...
Hey, the
Let me guess, you guys just came from the Red Lobster and now you want me to fill your jacuzzi with drawn butter.
No, everything's great.
All right, see you later.
Okay.
I've never been there.
Sam? Everything's great. We can go to the Grand Canyon immediately.
Really? Let's go.
I wouldn't know the first thing to say to the Steves. I can't even manage my own relationships.
Listen, all we have to do is use words like issues, accountability, inner child.
Well, when did this become our responsibility? The girls are equal partners in this.
That's right, and we can either argue with them or deal with the Steves. I think you know which one would be less stressful. Now, I'm gonna go set up an appointment with Steve.
Which one?
One or two. The white one.
Yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
I'm not like that, am I?
Like what?
Spontaneous, like Sam's client. They just got back from an impromptu helicopter trip to the Grand Canyon. You said the other day you thought that deliberate, non-spontaneous people are lame. Well, I am not spontaneous. I'm not.
Everybody's different. And if you think that I want you to be more like Eric Bates,
No.
that's not...
No, I think you want me to be more spontaneous.
I think you're way overthinking this.
Hey, have you talked to the Steves?
Soon.
Do not tell them to smoke the peace pipe.
Hey, holy cow, Ed McMahon, nice to meet you. I'm Oliver Goodhue, this is Ed DeLine.
How did this one?
Ray told us to drop by.
You look like nice enough fellas. Come on in. Hey.
That is a magnificent Grigor.
That's supposed to be me. Does this look like me?
Well, I think the artist is trying to capture the fundamental optimism that is Ed McMahon.
Really? Well, I'm not very optimistic that this is going to make it into my collection. Ray, you didn't tell me you had friends coming over.
Yeah, well, I didn't know.
Excuse me, would you mind terrible if we spoke to Ray privately for a moment?
You want me to leave?
Oh, no. No, sir, not at all. I meant, could we talk to him in private somewhere?
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.